Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Birthday gifts come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they are not the best. But Natasha has accustomed herself to enjoying any surprise. The girl grew up in an orphanage, so life did not spoil her with presents. When she was little, her grandmother used to send her apples from the village. Still, just seeing them made Natasha feel warm at heart. The girl knew someone needed her in this world. The apples were a sight to behold, ruddy and glossy. And the aroma? Natasha was always a dreamer. And so she immediately came up with the story that her grandmother was a fairy from a distant magic castle. And the apples were not easy either. No wonder that in the storybook was a matching picture with the same red delicious fruit. Deception, however, quickly uncovered when the children treated apples, an elderly nurse, and she was not rejuvenated in the slightest. Nevertheless, a fierce fight broke out over the tidbits from the village. Natasha generously shared the apples with the other children for herself, leaving only one, which the girl carefully guarded until the apple began to spoil. She kept it under her pillow, glanced at it at night, and remembered the village. She ate it only when its red sides were covered with ugly, stormy spots. So her memories of home had a tang of bitterness. Natasha's happiness, after all, was also shattered overnight when her parents died. Life presented her with other less pleasant gifts as well. At the age of 10, Natasha participated in some kind of recitation contest, recited a poem by Yesenin bird Cherry Tree Fragrant, and even won some kind of prize around town. The organizers of the contest gave the girl a diploma, which was later lost, and a pen in a case. It was too solid a thing for a child, which Natasha didn't dare to use. The director of the orphanage, where the girl lived, went even further and decided to reward the talented pupil with a solid book of biographies of Russian poets. The weighty volume was quite shabby. It had a library stamp and did not arouse the slightest interest in the girl. Later it disappeared somewhere. Most likely, went on to travel the world in search of a new mistress. These were all amusing incidents, and years later Natasha recalled them with a smile. It was only on her 30th birthday that she learned that presents can be not only pleasant or ridiculous, but also scary. Fate presented her with a gift, leaving her no chance to refuse. Natasha fidgeted in front of the mirror, trying to figure out if it was Paul, if her old holiday dress was not a pesky fly in the head and bust, and another thought whether her guest would remember that she had celebrated her 28th birthday in the same outfit. However, the girl chased it away. When a family is always short of money, it becomes not to the decency. Her husband could hardly convince her to have a banquet. They say that the anniversary must be a special occasion, although she thought that a trip to the supermarket without having to count every penny would be special for her. In the end, the couple agreed to assemble the closest family members and friends in the dining room without any new ones made of gold. Natasha warned Igor, "There's no need for all this tinsel. Please, a normal man would probably be happy. No need to spend money, to go shopping and choose a gift." But Igor was not normal. In response to Natasha's request, he pouted like a child. "You might think I'm a pauper," mumbled the man. "I can't once a year give my wife something special. What do I say once a year? The last time I gave you a necklace was 3 years ago, and you almost killed me to thank me for it." "Yes," Natasha confirmed prudently, "because we're not in a position to waste money. We'll pay off the rent." "And then when?" Igor asked bitterly. "In 20 or 30 years, when we'll have time to buy not gold and medicine for joint pain. You really aggravated me. Thank you." Natasha didn't know what to say to that, did she? Of course, she loved jewelry, beautiful clothes and jewelry, but she could not afford it all. Igor's salary mostly went for food and an apartment. Natasha was also contributing to the family budget, but the money she got in the library was just ridiculous, and the girl also had a dream. Fate had not yet given the couple children, but Natasha believed that one day that day would come, and if so, she should have prepared for the momentous event in advance. She was ready to give up luxuries for herself, but she wanted the best for her children. A difficult childhood was probably taking its toll. That is why Natasha saved a little from every paycheck. She dreamed in advance that her children would grow up to be princes and princesses. She did not tell her husband anything. She was afraid of the evil eye and had no idea how Igor would take it. Suddenly, he would say that she should spend the money on herself or on household needs. Sometimes her husband was so stubborn, Natasha did not want to argue with him. "What happened?" asked the girl, looking at Igor's distraught face. "Did you break something again?" In addition to the salty stubbornness and resentfulness, her husband had a surprising lack of dexterity. He behaved like an elephant in a china shop. Things broke in his hands a lot. The TV remote, the stapler, the computer mouse that belonged to his wife. And judging by the fact that usually Igor fixed it himself, but now came to his wife, it was a serious matter. "What happened?" Natasha asked. "Do not tell me that you broke the faucet in the bathroom. And now we're not going anywhere. By the way, why aren't you dressed yet?" That's why her husband answered and handed her his shirt. Here, of course, he tore off a button. Probably the third time this month, Natasha shook her head. "Now I understand why you became a fireman. You should only be allowed in places like this. Everything is ruined. It can't get any worse. In a decent apartment, it would blow everything apart at once." "I love you too," Igor answered. "Thank you." "Put your shirt on the chair," Natasha asked. "I'm coming in now." But she just took the threads out of the closet. As the phone rang, Igor's uncle wanted to talk to the girl urgently. An elderly man whom Natasha had only seen at her own wedding and had almost forgotten his face. "Yes, thank you, Ivan Mikhailovich, and good health to you too. Goodbye." She dropped the call and told her husband that your uncle decided to congratulate me. "Yes." Igor was surprised. "Unexpected. I haven't spoken to him in 100 years. I'll have to call him back later to see how it's going." Natasha went back to sewing, but another call came in. A former colleague of hers, who was ill and could not come to the banquet, decided to offer her congratulations over the phone. "If someone else calls, you will go to the party in your work clothes," Natasha told her husband, "or t-shirts, because I will not have time to sew a button." No sooner had she finished the phrase when she heard another call. Natasha grimaced painfully and told Igor, "You can get a t-shirt. Don't answer it," her husband advised. "Who needs it? Come to the banquet and congratulate there." "And what if it's your mother?" Natasha asked. "You have to answer. Antonina Mikhailovna won't come to the cafe. She might be offended." She took the phone, put it to her ear, and said, "Hello. Who is it? Speak quickly, please. I have very little time." Natasha cut off her sentence, did not finish. Igor, about to leave, turned around and saw his wife's face rapidly turning pale. "Who called?" asked her husband when she put down the phone. "And what did they say, Natasha? You have no face." "Called from the hospital." In a dull voice said the girl. There was a birthday party with Marina. A banquet. All at once, everything was forgotten. Natasha stood there like a dumbfounded and could not comprehend what had happened. The news that was reported on the phone could not be true. It was someone else's stupid joke. It had to be. Marina, beautiful and intelligent, could not get into such a mess, especially on her best friend's birthday. She always brought Natasha only good gifts. The girls met at the Orphanage. It's easy for her. There were no magical grandmother's apples yet. Natasha's mind was clouded by the death of her parents. The girl wanted to crawl into a corner somewhere and weep unsuccessfully. However, even this little thing was denied her. Kids always pay attention to newcomers with bright, fiery hair, which Natasha had, and it was impossible for them to go unnoticed at all. At first, the other girls in the group pestered her. They tried to find out who she was and where she was from. And when Natasha ran away from them into the yard, the boys and the redhead immediately got involved. A tall, dark-haired boy called out to the girl. He was a couple of years older than Natasha and looked like a real giant. Why are you so sour? My top was burning. He laughed at his own joke. It was neither funny nor original. That's why Natasha passed away. Maybe she wanted to go away, but the boy blocked her way. Stand there, redhead, he commanded. We do not know you. Tell me quickly, how did you get here? Maybe from the fence. Maybe your parents are alive. Answer me. The mention of her parents burned the girl like fire. Let go of me, she shouted and pushed the boy desperately. Gorilla unhappy Natasha had no idea. Why had she called him that? The boy did not look like a monkey. She could not think of anything more offensive at that moment. Pushing the stranger was like trying to move a mountain. The boy didn't move an inch. He only got angry and responded to Natasha. Sherbin said, "Don't be cheeky. Petty, I'm in charge here." Natasha honestly tried not to cry, but tears came to her eyes. But she did not know what else to do, when suddenly she heard a new voice. "You are not more impudent, Sashka. I'm the one in charge here, not you." It was then that Natasha saw Marina for the first time. At their first meeting, the girl seemed to her neither beautiful nor a heroine. Just another orphan girl with broken knees and blonde, short ponytails. However, the stranger looked very belligerent. Even the black-haired Sashka chickened out and ran, though he didn't want to show it. He did not challenge the girl's superiority and moved the conversation to another topic. "Marinka, look, what a wonder that redhead walks around here. As a fox. You yourself are a miracle cuckoo," barked girl. "Leave her alone and get out of here before I nettles look for you." To be more convincing, the stranger raised her hand, in which she held a long green branch. She prudently protected her own palm with a working glove. Sashka looked at the nettle, and then at her rival. Judging by the girl's belligerent gaze, the threat was very real. "What's the big deal, you scared?" He poked her, walking away from the doggy. "I'll show you who's weak, won't I?" shouted the girl with the ponytails and rushed off. It was after him. But Sashka skipped away. The girl came back to Natasha and looked down at her. She was the same age as Sasha and seemed very mature, almost like a graduate from the old Natasha, from the school that dressed up for the last bell in school uniforms with white aprons and walked terribly proud of themselves. "I'm Marina." The blonde introduced herself. "And what's your name?" "Natasha," mumbled the girl. "Natasha," repeated Marina. Her name was like listening to the way it sounded. "You've been here a long time. I haven't seen you before." 3 days, Natasha admitted. "And for some reason she added 8 years to me, as if to justify the fact that she is so small and weak and cannot defend herself. And I'm 10. Marina said to me, 'Don't be afraid of Sasha. He imagines things, and when the fight comes to the bushes, and the other boys won't do anything to you either. Only bend your throat.'" Natasha mechanically rubbed her forehead, already made the place where it clicked. Sashka was still sore. "They are afraid of me," Marina proudly declared. "They say I'm a painful drunk. If you want, I'll teach you too. You can defend yourself." "I want to," muttered the girl, though she had no idea how to dare hit the boy. Marina looked at her curiously and asked a new question. "Are your parents dead or drunk?" "No," Natasha answered them quietly. "There was an accident." At these words, tears came to her eyes. The story with Sasha distracted the girl for a while, but now the grief came back and came over her with renewed vigor. The smile left Marina's face. The girl hugged Natasha and stroked her head, muttered, Okay, don't cry. No one is having fun here. Even Sasha, though he plays the bully. Don't you have any relatives left?" "Grandma," said Natasha, "but she's an old woman living in the village. I was not allowed to stay with her." "You see, you're not alone anymore," Marina said wisely. "Grandma can visit you, and there's no one else." Natasha shook her head. Marina lowered her voice and asked, "Do you want a sister?" Natasha let her eyes out at her in surprise. "Sister?" she asked incredulously. "Where would she come from?" "Will she come from another country? like in the soap operas my mother used to watch. Were we separated as children? No, laughed Marina. That's not what I mean. Do you want me to be your sister? Natasha seemed like a big, strong girl, joking. Did she want to have a sister? Of course she did, especially one as brave and determined as Marina. With her, Natasha suddenly felt safe, what hadn't happened since her parents died. But what advantage was Marina to have such a sister? Natasha was small, shy, and generally considered herself more of a burden than a help. Of course I want to, Natasha replied. Aren't you laughing? At me? Why should you laugh at me? There's nothing special about me. What do you mean? Surprised Marina. Look how bright you are, like a candle and brave. I did not immediately come up. I saw how you pushed Sasha. And in general, do relatives have to be useful? I have an uncle Arkady. He drinks a lot and remembers me. He only comes here on holidays, shouting under the windows of the nannies who won't let him in. And he never brings gifts. But I love him because he's funny and because I feel that he needs me. I need it too, Natasha confessed embarrassedly. Marina laughed again and took her hair. But you see, later Natasha was somewhat disappointed when she found out that her new friend liked to protect the poor and needy, and therefore often took one or another girl under her wing. Still, Marina had a special relationship with Natasha. As promised, she introduced the girl to life in the orphanage, taught her how to fight back bullies, and even, as they say, took Natasha out into the world. When one of the most popular girls of these places took an interest in the new girl, others were too. She became curious as to what was so special about Natasha. Gradually, she got used to life in the orphanage did not scare her, so waking up at night in the common bedroom less mourned her parents. The grief dulled a little or Natasha just got used to it does not matter. The important thing was that after a few months she felt better. A named sister was by her side. Sometimes her grandmother came to visit. Natasha accustomed herself to enjoying what she had and not demanding much from life. When it was time for Marina to graduate, Natasha wept profusely. Natasha consoled her friend as best she could, and tears welled up in her own eyes. Why are you so silly? She asked Natasha. I'm not going to the edge of the world to live. Here in our city, only in the dormitory, Natasha was unsuccessful in visiting you on weekends. What was a miserable weekend when for many years Marina had been by her side. Unless they slept in separate rooms and spent all their free time together. To be without a friend was to Natasha about the same as to lose an arm or a leg. She had no idea how to go on living. Marina got a little tricky. And do you want me to come over at night and shout your name under the windows, as Uncle Arkady shouted? I do, Natasha nodded. It will be a pleasure for me. I thought you were shy and would refuse. Marina was surprised. I don't think you've ever liked scandals. I did, Natasha objected, but only if they were related to you. The interaction with her perky friend had really worked out for her. Together, they snuck into the kitchen and stole sweets. They climbed trees, wrote Sashka the Fool in front of the main entrance with chalk. And then the whole orphanage wondered whose handiwork was it. Yes, sometimes my friends got caught and were reprimanded by the teachers. But what memories were those? Natasha couldn't imagine how she would have survived the orphanage without Marina. Life without her would have been boring and bland, like food without salt and spice. There was no comparison. I'll wait for you, Marina promised. In a couple of years, you'll enter a technical school on your own. You'll live in the dormitory, and there I'll make a place for you. We'll have fun. We'll get together with friends without any curfew, and we'll get a lot of help from the teachers. Can you imagine? Natasha couldn't imagine such a thing. But with Marina by her side, the future would indeed be a time of miracles, and so it did. Marina quickly introduced her to life in the dormitory and her friends, just like in the orphanage years ago. Natasha became everyone's friend. They invited her to student parties, helped her with her studies, and in general everything was great, but there was still something missing. No matter what Marina said, 2 years apart did the trick. Marina became a confident adult, and Natasha was a shy freshman. She was just pouring into student life. And Marina got a close friend, Alla. Natasha disliked her from the first sight. Alla looked down on the freshman and often teased her. "You're coming for a walk with us." Alla was exaggeratedly surprised. "And you can. Soon is the session. It's a very important event. You can't fail any exams." "I know," Natasha answered grudgingly. "I didn't mean Valia." Or Alla would start joking about her hair colored in the orphanage. Everyone got used to it a long time ago. Many girls were even jealous of this zest in appearance, as they said. And no one at the technical school clung to her. Alla was the only one who wouldn't settle down. "Natasha was a fairy tale heroine," she said. "Really?" Marin nodded, the princess. "Actually, I meant Pippi Longstocking," Alla said sarcastically. Although perhaps red-haired princesses also exist in nature. It made Natasha angry, but it upset her even more that Marina did not take her insults seriously, and that Alka was only joking. She consoled her friend, but she was really offended. "And it is not serious." That was the point, Natasha mumbled seriously. But when she saw that Marina did not understand her, she switched the conversation to another topic. "How did you two become friends in the first place?" "You never told me about it." Marina sighed heavily. It seemed that these memories were not pleasant. "Do you really want to know?" she asked. And when Natasha readily nodded, sadly, I continued. "Then in my first year, I was as young and naive as you. And now I believe that now was the beginning of my real life. At the orphanage, everything was so toy-like, so unserious, wasn't it? And not the only worthwhile Sashka. The others weren't interesting as children." Natasha was surprised to recall that she and her friend had once thought of this black boy as an upstart and a fool. Now that he had turned 14, it was hard to believe it. Sashka had grown up and matured dramatically. A good half of the girls fell in love with him. Except, perhaps, Natasha. She remained firm, because she remembered that one. It's a shame, too. Low bien, yes, and generally thought that all the best things should go to Marina. She had fallen completely stupidly in love with Sashka and dreamed of him every night before going to bed. He, of course, out of the great multitude of groupies, chose Marina. Everywhere and everywhere guys paid attention to her. This bright blonde just could not go unnoticed. Of course, Marina could not compete with her more affluent peers in everything. She dressed secondhand, hardly used any makeup, and on weekends she wore an apron and worked part-time in a coffee shop. But when the girls smiled at such moments, she outshone everyone, even in her group. The flaunting, inexpensive outfits of a girl with smashed knees on the water and fear of bullies didn't go anywhere. She just grew up and transformed, turned into a heart stealer. She became more and more beautiful as the years went by. Black-haired Sashka was long forgotten. Other suitors were in Marina's crosshairs. "In my first year, I fell in love with Petya Melikov with a sad smile," told the girl. "He was such a tough-looking guy. You could make a movie with his car, even though it was old and screaming like a beast. And most importantly, Petya, he didn't smoke. You know I can't stand the smell of cigarettes. I'd kill whoever invented them." "I know," Natasha nodded. "But I've never heard of Petya Melikov. You never told me about him." Natasha could hardly hide her resentment. It turns out that while she was there in the orphanage, Marina had a great love, about which she never said a word. Is this the kind of friendship? Marina unraveled her gaze and guiltily shook her head. "You don't think so? Petya and I had nothing serious. So a couple of times we went to a nightclub. Once I spoiled his appearance." How was Natasha shocked? With a fist to the nose cut off her friend. "He, you see, swore his love to me while he was dating someone else. I found out about it when he showed up at my door with traces of lipstick on the collar of his shirt. He couldn't even wash it. Stupid kid. The story is like a soap opera. But I got angry too. Dated two in parallel. So when he got his award, me and the girls didn't see him for a long time afterwards. He was probably afraid he'd lose groupies if he showed up with a tear instead of a nose. Natasha thought about the story and remembered how it all started. "What does this have to do with Allah?" asked the girl. "Didn't you promise to tell me how you met?" But the conversation was about Petya. "And Julka was the one who did not let me do something stupid," Marina said. "I realize now that she's a scoundrel. The world is not the same. And then I had a drama, a real wreck of the world. Think about it. The first guy in the village had dumped me for a stranger." She looked gloomily out the window. Natasha was tormented by a terrible foreboding. Asked, "And what did you do?" "I wanted to take a sip of pills," grimly murmured Marina. 3 times idiot. Good thing Alka came to my room that day for some reason and called an ambulance. Natasha was frightened silent. She imagined what would have happened if Olga had not been in the right place at the right time. And she felt that not only was she not angry with the girl, but that she was ready to forgive all the taunts, both past and future, for many years to come. "Do you remember how long it took me to come to you?" Marina asked. Natasha nodded. "I told you that I was in hospital with pneumonia. But that was a lie," she continued. "I really was in the hospital, only not with my lungs, but with my head. They put me right away because of the pills. They gave me sedatives, as if they could cure a broken heart." "Aren't you cured?" Natasha whispered. "As you can see, alive and well." Marina threw up her hands. "Only it wasn't doctors who healed me, but time." "Well, can we talk about something more fun? Let's go to the canteen. All this talk makes me hungry." They never brought up that story again. Or rather, Natasha thought about it, but didn't talk about it for fear of awakening painful memories. And she fed herself. Was she really a silly little girl? Since she had not noticed the state of her friend and how it was possible that Marina all her life defends her from the cruel world, and Natasha herself cannot pay back anything in return, completely useless. As the years went by, Marina learned the Swedish trade, but this profession did not appeal to her too much. The girl worked at the factory for 4 months, quit everything, and left to go freelance. At first she got a job as a sales clerk, then fell out with the director. She turned into a secretary because of the shortage. For 3 long months she wore a strict pencil skirt and dressed like a teacher, in the words of Marina. Then in the next request of her boss, she felt something obscene, and the girl was again out of a job. "The main thing is that I did not break his nose," Marina laughed. "And as only held, I do not know." It was the only time since high school when the girl mentioned her sad story aloud. Petya Melikov was never mentioned again. One day Marina came to Natasha in the modest room she rented and said, "I've got it. I know what I have to do. I'm going to the capital." "What for?" Natasha said. The news came as a blow. The girl almost dropped from her hands the cup of tea she had poured for her friend. Marina said the news not even in a mundane tone, but with joy, as if she could not wait to get on the train. And Natasha thought with despair that she would be alone. "Why do you ask?" "Who knows?" Marina shrugged her shoulders. "Moscow is the city of opportunities. I'm sure that I'll find something more than a job at a machine or a profession where you have to wash cups for some bigwig. Maybe I'll even become an actress. That's probably too much, though. Some lowly job like a studio owner or a photographer would suffice. What do you think?" Marina laughed and joked. And Natasha's hands trembled. She sank back in her chair and mechanically sipped her tea. Only now Marina noticed that something was wrong with her friend. "What is it?" she said hesitantly. She looked pale. "Natashka, are you feeling unwell?" "Yes," Natasha nodded. "I don't have enough air." Marina looked at her closely and understood everything. "Are you upset because of me? Because of this stupid departure?" "It's not stupid at all," Natasha objected. "Now we won't be able to see each other at all." The girl knew that she was whining again, acting like a little girl, even though she was 23. But she couldn't help it. At the thought of Marina, her sworn sister, not being around, the girl's heart was breaking. She wanted to cry, like she had when the boys in the yard took away her favorite doll. Marina squatted beside her and whispered, "But I will come to visit." "Yes, on vacation," muttered Natasha. "And you come to me," said Marina. Both girls knew that it was all just words, and both felt uncomfortable. Natasha struggled to collect money to pay the rent for her room. What kind of trips were there? Marina would surely make new friends and hobbies in the capital. At first, they would correspond in the evenings, and then messages would become less and less frequent. Natasha wiped away her tears and nodded bravely. "Go. I do not want to stand in the way of your happiness. You'll really get more out of it there. And I'll call you by video link. We do not live in the Stone Age, right?" Marina nodded with relief. But of course, she packed her things and left, and Natasha's life turned into a bore. She wasn't happy about the choice she had made in her time either, and enrolled in an institute to study to become a librarian. During the day, she worked at a small firm, moving some documents from place to place, and was dying of boredom. And at night, she studied. With the departure of her friend, all amusement was gone from her life. She could have called Alika over, but they had not become close during her years at the technical college. The girls were only linked by Marina, and when they were no longer. The relationship between Natasha and Olga turned to dust. They never even called each other. Thus the fall and half of winter passed. Marina phoned and wrote regularly, and sent Natasha various photographs. Here she was visiting a museum, looking at pictures with an intelligent look on her face. She had always hated them. But sitting in some cafe, smiling over a cup of coffee, Natasha was not too touched. What about her friend? Without her, most of all the girl was upset that Marina obviously had new friends or a friend. After all, someone was taking pictures of her in these places. Marina said little about herself and gave evasive answers to questions. Natasha knew that her friend worked as an administrator at a hotel. She had heard a couple of names of her acquaintances, but did not find out any details. Marina's life was shrouded in darkness. Where did such a mystery come from? Natasha did not understand. A session was approaching. Natasha was returning from her regular class, feeling like a squeezed lemon. Before the exams, the teachers were off the chain, asking more and more questions. Natasha thought of nothing but classes. Even her longing for entertainment faded into the background. Walking home, she kept running over and over in her head the answers she had given in the seminar, searching for mistakes. Her intuition told her that the wicked teacher would surely ask the same question on the exam, just to send the negligent student to retake the exam. Natasha was so deeply immersed in her own thoughts that she could not see anything around her. Why did she pay the price? "Careful," a man's voice shouted. Natasha slipped on the ice, pirouetted, but tumbled to the pavement nonetheless. The girl immediately felt a sharp pain in her leg, but she couldn't comprehend the sensation. A man leaned over her excitedly. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Badly mistaken." "Not really," Natasha muttered, more frightened. She only now noticed the strange greenish hue of the stranger's clothes. Nearby, his friends were crowding around in similar outfits, with shovels in their hands. Natasha looked up and read the sign on the building next to it, which said it was a fire station. Is that why these men look so strange? They're firemen. And why are they carrying shovels? Natasha asked. They must be. She did have a slight concussion, because in her normal state the girl was very fond in the presence of men. And she certainly didn't ask stupid questions. "We sometimes ask ourselves that question," said the mustachioed fireman, standing a little away. Why, the guy leaning over Natasha didn't pay any attention to that phrase because firemen aren't supposed to be janitors, he replied. "I think shoveling snow is nothing for a real man, and not a job at all, just entertainment." Behind him, I could hear chuckles mixed with grunts. Apparently, this guy was considered to be a weirdo. "Igor is a pioneer," Mustache Timer muttered. "He's ready to work for 10 sheep, and all for one paycheck to have fun. Here's to us, to everybody." Someone else asked. "Meanwhile, we'll play cards." Natasha stared at the hackles of the mochi and felt a surge of anger in her soul. The girl still remembered how it felt to be laughed at. And even if it was you, Igor, who was her age, if not older. But Natasha had an indomitable urge to defend this guy. "I, too, think that clearing snow is nothing," she declared. "It's all the more mean to dump such a job on some old man. That wouldn't be very masculine." The men looked at each other. No one said anything about old men. The mustachioed one spoke up cautiously. "I know," Natasha nodded. "It's just that my grandmother, when my grandfather died, always cleaned the paths herself and worked in the vegetable garden. It never even occurred to her to cry about it, although she probably could have. And you?" Igor blushed like a poppy, as if sorry for having caused such a stir with his harmless statement. Mustache Conciliator said, "Well, that's it, all washed up. Let's get this argument over with and leave it at peace. Otherwise, I think you'll write an article in the newspaper about us, making us look like scoundrels and idlers who have no faith." Nanikiteev mumbled confusedly. "Natasha and in general, excuse me, please, something I broke off. You're probably right about something. After all, your job is to put out fires, not shovel snow. So we made up." Igor clapped his hands together. "So maybe we can finally get back on our feet. And I'm sorry you fell because of us." "Why because of you?" Natasha was surprised. "But we managed to shovel the snow, right? That's why she slipped." Igor held out his hand to help her up. But as soon as Natasha stood up, she felt a twinge. "Does it hurt? What is the leg? Does it hurt?" Disturbed, asked Igor. "Guys, she still struck out. Now for sure she will write a complaint." Mustache muttered grimly. "I'm not going to complain to anyone." Natasha said indignantly, "It's your own fault." She was either thinking out of her own free will or out of her own. "But something has to be done, right?" Igor objected. "Let me take you to our place, where you can rest and get warm. And then we'll decide what to do." Natasha was finally embarrassed and started to protest. But who listened to her? The 5 men almost carried her in their arms into the building. There the girls immediately shoved a cup of tea into her hand and sat her down on a chair. Someone brought a heater closer. "It's cold in here," muttered Mustache to warm himself. "You'll hang your sprain on us, or you'll catch a cold too." The girl smiled. He seemed like a nice man after all. He was just being nice. He sounded a little strange. Maybe he was just embarrassed to be nice. The fireman's room turned out to be quite cozy. A radio was muttering quietly. On the table was a chessboard with pieces placed. Natasha looked around curiously and almost forgot about her leg. It was Igor's voice that brought her back to reality. Did the girl shake her head? "No, not really. Thank you very much for your hospitality. I'll drink my tea now and go." "I don't want to keep you, and you won't keep us," Igor assured her. "The snow won't run away from us, only more. Till morning it's gone, and that's it. And you do not run," as the mustachioed muttered to the fire, "or you'll break the other leg. By the way, you definitely don't have a fracture?" Igor asked, looking at the girl with concern. "It's okay," Natasha assured him. "Don't worry about me. Can I ask you a question?" He was interrupted by the alarm on the loudspeaker, which Natasha had not noticed before. She heard a serious voice. Frightened, she could not make out the words. The sound was bad, like at a railway station, when the dispatcher seems to be talking to himself. Somewhere there was a fire. "Jinxed," muttered Mustache, and raced away. At once the firemen forgot about their guest and ran out of the room. Natasha sat down, a cup of uncooked tea in her hand, feeling very foolish. What should she do now? Maybe just run away before anyone sees. Natasha put the cup on the table and tried to get up on her feet. The girl was immediately pierced by a sharp pain. Besides, Natasha's guards hadn't forgotten about her at all, as it seemed at first. Igor returned to the room, completely transformed, in a protective coverall with a helmet on his head, and picked up the girl on his arm. "What are you doing?" Natasha gasped. "Put me on my feet right now." "Is that an order or a request?" the man asked, without stopping. "Demand is not a word in my vocabulary." Igor's smile is wide and childishly mischievous. To disarm the girl, she could not find what to answer. But Mustachioed, noticing them, went wild. "Smith, you're out of your mind," he barked. "This, madam, that will go with us." "I forgot the instructions, but not to leave her in the unit," answered Igor. "You mustn't, and you can take her to the fire," sneered Mustache. The girl decided he was a kind of boss and decided to protect Igor. It was an idea to get into trouble for foolish chivalry. It seemed to her very guise. "Don't argue because of me," she asked. "I'll call a cab and leave." "I'll be all right, won't I?" "See," interrupted the mustachioed Igor. "She'll call a cab and leave. Personally, I'm fine with that option. And where will I put her before that? In a snowdrift?" Igor was indignant. "She can't stand still." The driver put an end to the argument by reminding everyone that it was time to go to the fire. Igor put Natasha in the car and sat down beside him. The siren sounded, and the brigade left for the call. The girl squinted at her neighbors with embarrassment, but the firemen looked serious and collected. No trace of their recent smiles remained. They had completely forgotten about Natasha's presence. Now all the men's thoughts were occupied by the work to be done, and the girl involuntarily ate. Perhaps she really should have waited in the snowdrift. At least it was safe there. Igor caught her gaze and asked, "Are you afraid?" The siren screamed so loudly that the girl made it out. His question only through her lips. She shook her head negatively, and Igor showed her his thumb as a sign of aggravation. Natasha's embarrassment infected her, and she turned away. Putting her hand on her heart, no man had ever paid so much attention to her before, much less carried her in his arms. In front of her flamboyant friend, the girl had always seemed an unassuming lidlock, and only now, breaking free from Marina's custody, was she able to attract someone's attention to the fire scene. They got there in 8 minutes, running a red light twice and Podrzov into some fancy foreign car. Natasha's trip seemed incredibly fast, and someone, on the contrary, muttered slowly. She did not seem to be able to understand these people. A small private house on the edge of the city, a cozy wooden mansion, which looked about 100 years old at least, was on fire. Natasha's heart ached at the sight of it. There were few old buildings left in their city as it was, and the loss of such a miracle would have been a disaster. "Stay here," Igor ordered the girl and ran to unwrap the hose. Natasha watched the actions of the firefighters with concern. What in the movies looked like a harmless computer graphic that only slightly touches the nerves in reality turned out to be dangerous. She was some distance away from the fire, but even there her eyes counted, and in her throat the heat from the smoke reached the car. And Natasha was frightened, wondering if the car would blow up if a spark accidentally reached it. Firemen were bustling around the house, giving each other commands, and it was hard to distinguish where and who was in the smoke. And yet the girl looked for Igor. Natasha, it seemed that the man's trim figure and confident movements distinguished him from all the others. Igor was special. The girl realized this at the first meeting and immediately fell in love. Not far from the car, wringing her hands, walked an old woman in a down jacket. One could see that she was very nervous, and therefore unable to stand still. There was no scarf or hat on the head of the stranger. She did not even notice that snow was falling with white feathers on her hair. Natasha looked out of the window and called out to the old woman, "You're freezing. Don't stand there." The stranger did not hear her. All her attention was fixed on the house, and the girl suddenly realized that this was the mistress of the mansion. What was it like for her to watch everything she held dear turn to ashes? Natasha climbed out of the car and, writhing with every step, approached the old woman. "You are frozen by the burning tone," she said, putting the miserable hood over her head. For Stegny here, the stranger seemed not to hear her. She looked at the girl with frightened eyes and quietly said, "There Fidia stayed." What? Natasha asked Natasha, frightened. There is someone inside. Fechenko repeated. The old woman didn't come out with me. Natasha looked around in panic and shouted to Igor. He didn't hear her. And no wonder there was such a noise. Then the girl herself ran toward Igor. Every step was a painful one. Natasha thought she was going to fall to the ground, but she kept nodding her teeth and kept running. Igor. She grabbed the man by the shoulder and screamed at the top of her lungs. There's a man down there. We're stunned. Igor asked. Inside the house. That's what the woman said. Igor looked around in panic, found the mustachioed man with his eyes, and shouted, Vasilich, I'm in the house. There's someone there. How do you know? Mustache asked and nodded at the girl. Is that it? She said she saw a ghost in the window. The landlady told me in an offended tone, said Natasha. She must have been mistaken in thinking the mustachioed man was a good person. She had never met anyone as bad as him. She swore that she lived alone, said the girl. Shouted Mustache, and added a few emotional swear words, which made a modest Natasha blushed. Igor rushed to the house. Careful, Natasha shouted after him. But of course, Igor heard nothing. Seconds dragged on, like hours. The girl finally understood what the firemen meant when they called the 8-minute ride slow. She stood beside the old woman and also wrung her hands. But returning from the burning house was Igor. Both looked at him like he was a hero. Are you okay? Natasha asked. And where Fedia? Probably, answered Igor, handing the mistress of the house a huge striped cat. There was no one else. The old woman burst into tears and threw herself at Igor with an embrace. Then the same fate befell the frightened Heights. Natasha herself was on the verge of hysteria and did not notice that tears were pouring down her cheeks. Until Igor asked her, why are you crying? Everything is fine. And it might not have been, the girl replied, who shouted from afar, Mustache. No one else. Cat. Whiskers shouted from afar. No one else. Igor nodded, and the latter shouted, a disgruntled face. Mustache seemed to have no idea what a good mood was. No matter what happened, he was always dissatisfied. Go back to the car, Igor advised girls. Soon we'll be done, and we'll drive back. Natasha, however, could not sit still after what happened. She continued to stand next to the mistress of the house. She stroked the cat, and the old ladies echoed. Heroes. What kind of heroes are they? In the end, the mansion burned to the ground. It was impossible to save the wooden building. The old woman wept, but was consoled by her daughter, who finally arrived. The cat poked everyone in the face of the mistress, and also consoled in his own way. It hurt to look at them, muttered. Natasha was touched by this picture. Unfortunately, that happens in our work, said Igor, who came up. It's impossible to save everything and everyone. The girl shook her head. I wouldn't be able to get used to such a thing. And we have to, mumbled Igor, tearing our hearts out. No strength is enough. The firemen rolled out their hoses and were about to leave. The landlady came up to Igor again. I'm sorry, said the boy in a guilty tone. For the fact that we did not save your house, the old lady waved her hand. What's the matter with the house? She replied, although her eyes were teary-eyed. The house, that a box. Thank you for saving Fedia. Igor stroked the cat's head and smiled. Always glad to help. It's my job to save everyone from the fire. And you, Striped, take care of the mistress. We can't always be around. The crew drove back to the unit. Natasha was with them again, but now she looked at the men in a new way. Not as if they were jokers in a snowball fight, but as heroes, saving their human lives. They didn't talk much. They were more silent. The cars smelled strongly of garbage. Natasha, however, was not at all worried that her clothes would begin to smell of smoke, too. The girl wished this trip would never end. When they arrived at the place, the mustachioed man grudgingly looked at Natasha and muttered, "Call a cab." There was no reason for her to make a mistake here. Igor looked at the girl guiltily. Sorry. It really is time for you to go. Natasha nodded disappointedly. I understand. The mustachioed turned his gaze from one to the other and suffered, rolled his eyes. Lord, what kind of young people have become? You hesitantly exchange phones, and that's the end of it. You should be taught everything. Smith, like a little boy, honestly. At that moment, Natasha was ready to vanish into thin air. Such impudence confused her and seemed completely inappropriate. Later, however, the girl was even grateful to the mustachioed. Igor turned out to be too undecided. A gift for working in such a dangerous job. He was too shy to write to Natasha too often. He said he was afraid of getting bored. When he made dates, he specified all the details, figuring out where the girl wanted to go. Igor seemed to be afraid of any surprises, and by all means did not let them into his life. It seems surprising how Natasha got into it. The girl often wondered about her shy beau with her friend and wondered what would come of it. Sometimes I think it's very nice that Igor cares about me so much, and other times I get angry. Told Natasha, he plans everything so clearly that the romance is lost. He even buys flowers, specifies what color I like, and whether I like strong smells or vice versa. They irritate me. It's like a logic game. Sometimes I guess the name of the flowers before Igor brings them. And what exactly do you want from a relationship? Marina asked. Reliability or the passion of love? Natasha confessed. And you know, it seems that I really love Igor. Maybe because he's such a clumsy. Thinks, plans, and then he ends up with some nonsense. He's always mixing things up or revising his plans. But if he depended less on others, it would be better. And on whom does he depend? Marina asked her mother. Natasha sighed. Evdokia Pavlovna, so harsh, a real nightmare. With her future mother-in-law, she met a couple of months after she met Igor, and that at the initiative of the woman herself. The young people did not feel any joy at this venture. How did your mother even know about my existence? Natasha asked with horror. Why did you tell her? I did not, answered Igor. Or rather, I did not intend to tell her right away. Maybe sometime later, my mother noticed that I often leave home and asked me where exactly I was going. I had to tell her about you too. That is about us. I wish you had lied, sighed the girl. But sooner or later she would have found out anyway. Igor remarked. We're not going to hide forever, are we? He didn't finish his sentence and fell silent. With some kind of frightened look on her face, Natasha couldn't figure out what was on the guy's mind. In a hurry, his girlfriend. What am I? I was just thinking. Reluctantly mumbled Igor. Maybe you do not want to be with me forever. Maybe I made it all up. Then you don't have to meet my mom either. Natasha burst out and punched him in the shoulder with her fist. How stupid are you, Igor? She exclaimed. You know, after this, I really start to think, I want to be with you or not. According to you, I'm the kind of person who goes out to have fun. So you don't believe I really love you? No, but forgive me, muttered Igor. You're right, I really am a real fool. Natasha was resentfully silent. Igor hesitantly said, I love you too. What can I do to make you forgive me? Introduce me to your mother, mumbled the girl. I want to see the woman who raised my future husband. Igor rarely talked about his childhood, but from what Natasha knew, the picture was quite clear. Evdokia Pavlovna met her future husband at a factory. She worked as an accountant, and the man as a foreman on some site. They met by chance, started talking. As Natasha realized, they were both quite serious people, even despite their age. They got married 6 months after they met. 2 years later, Igor was born. Everything went according to plan. This family simply could not have it any other way. The couple expected to have a second child, a girl, when their son was 3 or 4 years old, but they didn't have time. Tragedy befell Igor's father in an accident at work. Evdokia Pavlovna was left alone with the son in her arms. She no longer wanted to get married. She made it her goal to raise Igor. The next point was probably to have grandchildren. Thinking about it, Natasha inwardly shuddered. She imagined what Yevdokia Pavlovna would turn out to be like. She was an iron lady, impenetrable, nagging at every word and look. It was difficult, if not impossible, to control her. That's about how Yevdokia Pavlovna turned out. She invited her to her house for pies, and she was dressed as a well-behaved housewife in a colorful dress and slippers. However, the girl felt that it was all an appearance. Yevdokia Pavlovna studying her throughout the meal, so Natasha did not have a bite in her throat. Then she asked, "What can you tell about yourself? Where do you work? What do you do?" "I work as a clerk in a small company," she answered, "but in the future I'm going to be a librarian." Yevdokia Pavlovna approved of the right decision. Why work with your hands when you have a head? Now, no one likes it. Mom reproachfully said Igor. Why? Surprised the woman. I, on the contrary, approve. Why clever people collect something in the factory to spoil their manicure? That's right, let him read books. She looked at Natasha again and asked who your parents were. Can I meet them? They died. When I was 8, Natasha said. They were in an accident on the highway outside of town. They were hit by a drunk driver. This revelation was not easy for her. Despite the years that had passed, Natasha's heart ached. The last thing she wanted to do was to confess to Yevdokia Pavlovna, who did not care about other people's feelings. But she looked at her with indifferent eyes and thought of her own things. She kept looking for sins she could accuse the girl of. Drunk on the roads is terrible, nodded Yevdokia Pavlovna. But you yourself, I hope, do not drink. After these words, Natasha wanted to throw her own pie at the woman. The girl could not even think that her sweet, undecided Igor could have such a terrible mother. I guess if I told her I'd read an article about some maniac, she would have asked me if I had killed someone. Natasha was indignant, telling her friend about the meeting. Terrible woman. People like that should be kept away. Marina agreed. Or better yet, in a different city. As the years go by, I'm beginning to think that Sashka from the orphanage was the perfect groom. No mother-in-law picking on anyone. It's a beauty. She was quiet for a while, and then added, although my Felix isn't bad either. His parents are far away from the Urals. They won't bother me for sure. It wasn't the first time Natasha had heard her friend's hints about Felix. Marina spoke of him infrequently and with a gasp. She really seemed to be in love with him. Natasha even secretly invited her. Her friend's stories reminded her of a fantasy movie. Felix from the local Bohemia introduced me to his friends. I now go to their parties. Can you imagine? I can get tickets to any theater, any exhibition by acquaintance. And this summer, Felix and I are going to India or Thailand. We haven't decided yet. We'll rent a bungalow by the ocean and relax. Me and the ocean. It's impossible to imagine. I wish I could tell the guys at the maternity ward. They'd be so busted. I guess they thought I was good for nothing but sewing car covers. But you love him. Every time, Natasha pointed out. Of course I do. A little offended, said her friend. I could not live with a man I did not love, no matter how thrice prince or sheikh. What do you take me for? And Natasha took her friend for a girl in love, capable of anything stupid. She remembered how reckless Marina had been in the past, and mentally wished her happiness. The main thing that she once again, she was not mistaken. Those days when Igor went to work, Natasha simply hated. A picture was firmly fixed in her memory. A guy goes into a blazing house, and it seems that the smoke forever consumes his figure, does not allow to escape back. The girl marked Igor's changes in the calendars for the year ahead first in black, and then, frightened by those grim circles, tore up the pages and started all over again. Took another calendar and marked its shifts in pink. Those days were now the holiday dates of another rescue from the fire. Natasha asked Igor to be sure to send her a message at the end of her shift, and waiting for him, walked around in a kind of trance, like before an exam at the institute. On such days, she was inattentive at work and mixed up documents. And if Igor's shift fell on a day off, Natasha just couldn't find herself. Sometimes the girl even wondered if it wouldn't be better to live without any love. Before she met Igor, her life had been so measured and quiet. Every day was like another. However, Natasha had always dismissed these thoughts. Before she met Igor, she was nothing, and the girl's life could hardly be called such an existence. Now everything had changed. Yes, there was nervousness, but with it came happiness. Natasha felt that someone needed her, and the realization of that opened the girl up this Sunday. The young people were supposed to go to the movies. Natasha woke up in a kind of joyful, anticipatory anticipation. It would seem that nothing special was expected. They had gone to the cinema dozens of times, and yet her heart, the girl trembled. Maybe it was just that the day was unprecedentedly bright and sunny. Natasha herself could not explain her joy. She felt sorry for the eggs and wrote something under her breath. Her neighbor looked at her cheerfully, saying that Natasha was expecting a special day. The girl shrugged her shoulders normally. Just a good mood. I was in a good mood too. When I was young, when I fell in love, the neighbor sighed. And now look at my husband. The phrase was rhetorical. The man was in the other room. But Natasha remembered perfectly well what he was like with his full face and a slightly expressionless look that only cleared up when a soccer match was on TV. This turn of conversation did not please her at all. Could it be that her neighbor was hinting that one day Igor would be like that? Could it not be? It was unthinkable. Her neighbor wiped the table and left the kitchen. Natasha's breakfast was quietly grumbling in the pan. The girl continued humming and did not hear the phone ring in her room. A neighbor came to the rescue. Natasha shouted, "It's ringing." "Thank you, Irina Sergeyevna." "Coming," shouted the girl and hurried into the room. She was looking for a place to live. Natasha prepared for all kinds of trouble in advance. She heard many horror stories from her acquaintances about spiteful neighbors, poured salt in the pot about horny men who do not give a pass to young faces, about the owner's children, who are not ceremonious with other people's clothes, can spoil a new coat or boots. Fortunately, Natasha herself was lucky with her hosts. The son of Elena Sergeyevna and her husband settled in the capital a long time ago. The three-room apartment began to seem too spacious to the couple. Irina Sergeyevna's husband was always lying on the sofa watching TV, and the woman was tormented by her loneliness. Deciding to make extra money, and at the same time to do a good deed, Irina Sergeyevna, for a nominal fee, rented one of the rooms to Natasha. It was her son's former bedroom. Pencil drawings of Italy still hung on the walls. The girl did not take them down. The drawings made the room feel cozy and reminded her of her childhood. Natasha had once had a room just like this with drawings. How long ago was that? Igor's name popped up on the phone screen. At first, Natasha was happy, but then an uneasy feeling hit her. They were going to the movies in 3 o'clock. Was something wrong? "Hello," cautiously said the girl. "Hello, Igor. How are you?" "I'm fine," answered the guy with a good morning. Natasha woke up and decided to call right away. The girl was relieved from her heart. It seemed that everything was normal. "Sonia said fondly," she said. "It's already 9 o'clock, and you're still from Lesha. I would have slept for another 24 hours, answered Igor. "Yesterday, I had a hard shift. Vasilich called. He woke me up." Natasha asked, "What did he want?" "It's your day off, isn't it?" "Not anymore," he answered. "I have an urgent call. Work on the other shift." Half the crew came down with food poisoning. They must have been celebrating. The girl looked at her exit dress, carefully laid out, and even on a hanger, and she felt tears of disappointment come to her eyes. "They have no right to do that," shouted Natasha. "I mean your superiors. You haven't rested after your shift. You haven't slept. You can barely stand on your feet, and you're going to work. And if there's a fire in your condition, it's just dangerous to go out and fight it. Nothing will happen." Natasha was reassured by Igor. "Everything will be fine. And you go to the movies for both of us." "Okay, then tell me all about it." The trailer intrigued me. Natasha, said goodbye to him, and threw the phone on the bed. A wonderful weekend was spoiled. No good weather, no sunshine, no longer pleased the girl. Everything went wrong. To top it all off, the neighbor screamed again, "Natashenka, it seems that something is burning in your kitchen." Natasha rushed out into the kitchen and found Irina Sergeyevna by the stove. She helplessly pointed at the frying pan and said, "Sorry, I was in the other room. I didn't know that there was something burning. I thought you turned off the stove." The scrambled eggs were burning, and it was not a pretty sight. The girl with the Marcella nose and threw it in the trash. "It's not your fault," Natasha said. "And I'm not hungry." Upset. "There's no reason to be." "No," objected Irina Sergeyevna. "That's no good. The eggs are burnt." "Well, what the hell with it? Have breakfast with us. Come on, let's go." We were just sitting down at the table. The woman almost forced Natasha into the living room and sat her down at the table. Irina Sergeyevna's husband did not object to the third person at the table. Natasha was not at all sure that he had noticed her appearance. The man sat staring at a newspaper. Irina Sergeyevna was flapping around her like a brooder, and the girl felt a fleeting envy of Vitaly. He had gone to Moscow for a lot of money, not thinking at all about the fact that real happiness remained at home. How stupid people can be. After breakfast, Natasha helped her neighbor wash the dishes and went back to her room. There was absolutely nothing to do. She did not want to go to the movies without Igor. And what she did on weekends before she met him, she had completely forgotten. For a while, the girl crouched idly around the room, moving things from place to place and convincing herself that she was cleaning, and then she collapsed on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The clock on the nightstand showed 11 o'clock in the afternoon. Natasha wished the day would end sooner, so she could meet Igor. At some point, the girl must have dozed off, because what happened next was very reminiscent of a dream on a horse glass, what with the screeching of the talus. And Natasha jumped up on the bed. She did not immediately understand what it was all about. And then she saw Igor's face outside the window. The girl pinched her hand. The vision did not disappear. Irina Sergeyevna's apartment was located on the 4th floor. So then the guy waved and smiled at her. "Open up, please," he shouted. "It's cold in here," keeping her frozen gaze on him. The girl went to the window and turned the knob. The window swung open. A fresh wind began to flutter the curtains. Igor jumped easily into the room, and Natasha looked outside. A fire truck was standing under the window. Igor's friends were already assembling a ladder. After a couple of minutes of delighting the neighborhood kids, the car drove out of the yard. To the unit in a hurry, Igor explained, "They've already broken all the possible rules by bringing me here." "What rules?" "I don't understand, Natasha. What does it all mean, Igor?" "And it means," the guy replied, "that I'm asking you to be my wife." He knelt down in front of Natasha and pulled out a ring from his pocket. "Do you agree with the hope?" Igor asked. "Of course you do, don't you?" the girl exclaimed and threw herself on his neck. When the passions had subsided a little, Natasha asked what it was all about. "The car stairs. What has gotten into you, Igor? Don't you have enough of it at work?" "Actually, it's enough," he answered. "But you once said that our lives lack romance, and I decided to arrange it in my own way. Of course, as a firefighter. I've always had a bad imagination for climbing into your window. It was the only thing I could think of." "Romantic you are," said Natasha affectionately. "And yet that's the way I love you. Please, don't ever change." "Okay." Irina Sergeyevna, who came to the noise, grabbed her heart. "We have guests. And I didn't know, young man. Where did you come from?" "I didn't hear the front door open." "Igor didn't come in through the door," Natasha answered, "but through the window. Meet Irina Sergeyevna. This is my future husband." Her neighbor stared at her in amazement for a moment, and then clapped her hands. "What a piece of news," she exclaimed. "You sang this morning for a reason, didn't you? It's been a wonderful day. Why are you standing there? Come quickly to the table. My cake will be ready in a minute, and Stepan will bring his homemade wine from the garage." I'm the one who ransacked him. What an idea for an anniversary, waiting for such an occasion. Stepan Petrovich didn't resist for long. It is unlikely that he was very happy with the news of his impending marriage. Most likely, the man was just waiting for an excuse to drink. Be that as it may, already after the first glass of wine, he congratulated the young couple in the most colorful terms, and after the second named Igor and his son. The newcomers at the wedding did not have a good time, at least on yours, the man muttered. That's right, Vitek. And the guy nodded confusedly. Anyway, it was much nicer than the storm that his mother Evdokia Pavlovna arranged on this occasion. Upon learning that her son had decided to marry into an orphanage, she tore and meddled. Igor, I do not recognize you, exclaimed Anna. Always been such a sensible boy. And there are no decent girls left for you in the city. Mama Natasha is decent as it is. Igor tried to talk sense into his mother. What's wrong with her? She doesn't walk around in short skirts and swear. She reads books and cooks. Great. She's not a bride. She's perfect. You shook your head, you fool. Your mother's leading you around by the nose, and you can't see it. For a bridegroom like you, any light will do. You're not only handsome, you're also a hero. What's your profession, fireman? And the apartment? She's a homeless orphan who only licks our meter. And you think it's love. What if it's only love for square meters? However, whatever words Yevdokia Pavlovna found, Igor stood his ground. He loves Natasha, period. Evdokia Pavlovna threw tantrums, threatened, almost prayed to her son to cancel the wedding, all to no avail. Natasha, he, of course, did not tell him about it. And the girl herself guessed what it was all about. She understood by the heavy stare of the future mother-in-law, which she threw at her every time she met. Marina, who came to the wedding, also noticed it. And who is that old witch, snorting viciously at everyone from her corner? Asked the girl, pointing at Evdokia Pavlovna with a fork. When I entered the restaurant, she looked at me as if I were a thief or something worse. And now the look is ready to cut out of her. Natasha hesitated. Marina nodded understandingly and let me guess it was your mother-in-law. Yes, yes, Natasha confirmed. How did you guess? Do you still ask? Did you, Marina? It's the real mother-in-law from the jokes. A walking caricature. Bad luck for you, Natasha. Will you have to live with such a snake? No, don't you think so? Natasha objected. I met Igor and I love him. That alone is happiness. And with everything else, we'll somehow cope. Well, vaguely held out her friend. If anything, I can give you the contacts of a boxing teacher in case it comes in handy. How about you? Natasha asked, wanting to change the conversation. How is Felix? Why didn't he come, by the way? He's having another exhibition, said Marina. He's been sculpting some statues and charging people money to view them. To be honest, I don't understand anything about it, except that there was a model. And for one of them you struck out. Natasha, it can't be. Sure it can, Marina grinned. Wait, in a couple of 100 years, archaeologists will dig up a copy of me somewhere and put it in a museum. I'll be in history, I can tell you that. And you deserve it, softly remarked Natasha. So how do you live anyway? Aren't you going to get married? Marina, all these little things in life, she said. The main thing is that we are happy and we love each other. What else do you need? Marina said this, but her eyes were sad. It seemed that she was not voicing her own thoughts, but repeating someone else's. Was it not the mythical Felix who had won her heart? Natasha had a dark premonition. No matter how hard she tried, she could not share her friend's enthusiasm. She got the feeling that Marina was simply being deceived. Music was playing in the hall. The guests were participating in some silly contests. Marina looked at her friend with shining eyes and whispered. Natasha was surprised. Next year I will become a mother, said Marina. Perhaps even on New Year's Eve. I'm pregnant. Natasha joyfully weighed and threw herself on her friend's neck. The latter stroked her on the head and said, I recognize my Natasha. I knew that's how you would react. I told her about it earlier in my letter, and she started rebuking me. Told me not to do nonsense, that I had no faith in men, and that I would stay. I am alone at the broken trough, surrounded by dirty diapers. And I suddenly realized that I do not care. The main thing is that I will have children. And Felix is his business. If it's more important to him, then so be it. I don't know about Felix and his exhibitions, but you're all that matters to me, Natasha assured her. I will always be at your side. I promise, and I want to be the godmother of your child. And yes, I'm already clear to him. A long time ago in an orphanage. You chose me to be your sister, remember? I remember, Marina answered fondly, and did not regret it for a moment. Believe me, the wedding was well celebrated. Igor's witness was Yusity, or Nikolai Vasilievich, as Natasha now called him, and Marina was taken as a witness. The young couple's future looked clear and cloudless. The only dark cloud on the horizon was Evdokia Pavlovna. The whole banquet she sat with a sour look, as if not married her son, and going to bury. Even a toast did not begin to make, but the toastmaster somehow hushed up. This rudeness passed the microphone to another guest. Natasha tried not to pay attention to it, but her heart clutched with anxiety. What kind of life could wait for Natasha with such a mother-in-law, if she was out of place to begin with? Saying goodbye to her friend, Marina whispered boxing lessons. Don't forget them. My offer still stands. Well, seriously, I'm sorry for you. You're too soft. So I guess it'll swallow you whole. Just remember, I'm always there for you, to comfort you over the phone. And if you need it, I'll be here. As a last resort, I'm always ready to come to your house and put this especially in its place. So Nina, I'll be there for you in any situation. No matter what happens. I know, Natasha nodded. You take care of yourself too, Marina. And know that I will always help you in any way I can. And so Natasha's family life began. Marina looked straight into the water, didn't she? It wasn't easy. The young couple settled in Igor's room. Natasha met her first morning in the new house with a grumble from her mother-in-law. Where do you put so much salt? Grumbled Evdokia Pavlovna, as the girl helped her to make soup. Vitter, yesterday they shouted, and no one mentioned pickles at all. Natasha also cut the vegetables the wrong way. Too big or crooked. Unattractive. Even the tea behind a cooked girl did not settle. The mother-in-law, in her opinion, turned out to be too strong. The couple did not have a honeymoon because Igor could not get away on vacation. So Natasha immediately began to have a busy day. From the wedding table, where everyone looked at her rapturously and wished her happiness, to the stove, where her mother-in-law yelled at her. This was not the kind of married life she was expecting. Natasha tried to remember something of her mother and grandmother's relationship, but only quiet family dinners came to mind. Tales before bedtime, walks in the yard, no one yelling at each other or telling her what was best. Maybe that was why she, Natasha, had grown up inept. Don't talk nonsense. Marina interrupted her. Barely had the girl mentioned it. I remember that in my lessons at home you were the best of the class. You said it yourself, how the teacher praised your sandwiches and porridge. Honestly, I wondered how you didn't get bored with it all. For me, cooking has always been a bore of death. It's easier to get some half-finished food than to kill time at the stove. If I even brought up dumplings from the store, Evdokia Pavlovna would kill me, Natasha grinned. Be sure to say that they were mixed in all sorts of chemicals that would make Igor sick. In fact, I do not find it difficult to cook. If only Evdokia Pavlovna was satisfied with it, and she won't be. Marina categorically replied, Don't wait for anything. Your mother-in-law will not be happy with everything. You have only one way out. Where to? Natasha was surprised. Are you suggesting that I divorce Igor a week after the wedding? No way, divorce. But no, you'll only please your Evdokia, said Marina. I suggest you move out. Get an apartment or at least a room. You'll die right away, move in. Natasha just imagined it and already felt an inexplicable lightness. She was the only hostess in the kitchen. No one throws tantrums about a cup that's out of place or a cucumber crooked on Rezanov. It's heaven on earth. How little, it turns out, is required for happiness. That's just how to hint about it, Igor. Evdokia Pavlovna, his mother. It is unlikely that her husband would want to move out. Besides, the woman behaved quite well in front of him. She threw threatening glances at Natasha, but kept quiet. The girl did not know how much Evdokia Pavlovna talked about her when Natasha was at work. All the girl's sins were exposed to Igor, and some things her mother-in-law just made up. In my opinion, your wife is just spinning her tale. Disgruntled, she said at dinner. She spent half an hour today picking out an outfit for work. She's definitely moving papers around in there, or for some other purpose. What other purpose, Mom? Igor sighed. Who knows? Deeply thoughtful, said Evdokia Pavlovna. I drew with such care only when I met with your father. Then it did not seem necessary. At work we had a dress code, white top and black bottom. It's just Natasha's boss's anniversary today, so she dressed more carefully, Igor said. They're having some kind of banquet after work. Natasha could not go there as a nun. Banquet then? Evdokia Pavlovna asked. I see. And how old is the boss? Over 50? Don't be afraid. And stop hinting to me that Natasha may be cheating with someone else. We haven't lived together for a month yet, and you're already making up nonsense. It's ridiculous. Mama. Igor left her not to go and left the table, leaving his mother in shot feelings. Evdokia Pavlovna again laid the blame for this conversation on Natasha. Before the arrival of the coveted daughter-in-law, she and her son lived soul to soul. Every night Natasha went to bed with a heavy feeling. In the morning, she would have another argument with her mother-in-law. Igor also became thoughtful and silent. They were thinking of the same thing, but did not dare to voice their thoughts. Finally, after one conversation with his mother, the man could not stand it. Do you know, Natasha? He started hesitantly. I wanted to talk to you about something, but I don't know how you feel about it. The girl looked at him frightened, waiting for him to continue. Natasha had no idea what Evdokia Pavlovna was saying to her son behind her back, but she guessed that they were hardly compliments. What did Natasha ask? I've been thinking, said Igor. Why don't we try to live separately? Before we know it, we'll be in our 30s, and we're still living under supervision, like little kids. It's embarrassing in front of people. Natasha listened to him in surprise, and then laughed nervously, but with relief, like a sick diagnosis that was not confirmed. Moving in? She asked. Are you sure of that, Igor? After all, you have always lived with your mother, and you think I can't do it without a nanny, the man remarked offensively. You have a good opinion of me. Thank you. No, that's not what I meant. Natasha reassured him. It's just that your mother is old. Could she do it alone? For that sentence, the girl was ready to slap herself, but she could not take it back. And Natasha was ashamed to admit how bored she was. Evdokia Pavlovna did not want to make a mess of herself in front of her husband, even though that might have been exactly what she was. Natasha had no idea what kind of angelic patience it took to live next to Evdokia Pavlovna all her life. And why did you laugh? Igor asked. What was so funny? I said not funny, but rather offensive. Natasha corrected him. We will be 30 soon. How do you think I should have reacted to that? Scandalized. It's better to laugh. Yes, sighed Igor. We are worth each other. But with the move needs something to solve. We can't go on living like this. They did move. They found a small apartment near the house of Evdokia Pavlovna. Natasha had to accept this compromise. It was impossible to cut her mother-in-law out of her life anyway. She didn't tell Marina about it until after she moved in. She was afraid to jinx it, and when she did call her friend, she did it when Igor was at work. I was afraid the joy in her voice would be too obvious and offend her husband. You did the right thing. Marina approved. And most importantly, Do not suffer for years, persuading yourself to be patient a little more. You really need to use your head. Your husband is right not to always rely on your elders. And yet I'm surprised that your Igor took the initiative in this matter. Forgive me, Natasha, but the first time I met him, he seemed like a stranger. That's exactly what he seemed to her, Natasha. As you can see, he can still make a decision on his own without his mother. It's good, if that's what Marina agreed. Maybe now things will work out between you two. Natasha became alarmed at the sad voice of her friend. She immediately forgot her excitement and asked how things were going. "What's up with Felix?" echoed Marina. "Probably nothing anymore. We're different, Natasha. I was wrong again." "What's wrong? Are you upset?" Natasha asked. "Maybe it's just your imagination. You are so hot-tempered, aren't you?" "I'm afraid I'm not," said her friend. "He's got a new model who's been living with Felix in his studio, and I suspect it's more than just a sculptor's interest. The scoundrel doesn't tell me anything, of course, and won't admit to anything. But I can see how his eyes light up when he talks about his work. He can't wait to get back to the studio. And this girl's number is in his phone, and he uses it 100 times a day. See what I've come to, Natasha. Digging through other people's cell phones, and the main thing would be for whom. What about the kids? Are you upset?" Natasha asked. "What will happen to them? What will happen to them?" Marina was surprised. "I'm going to give birth, and Felix is going to let it go until retirement. Let's see which one of his dvokandas will snap. To bring him a glass of water. Mark my words, he'll be all alone in his old age." And with good reason. Natasha was silent, and suddenly said, "The girl did not expect Marina to agree to leave Moscow's bohemian metropolitan life. Was it possible?" However, Marina unexpectedly said, "I'll be back myself for a long time thinking about it. I don't belong here. It's all a complete sham. I have to go back to my homeland. No one needs me here anyway. And this way we'll be together as a threesome." Natasha corrected her. "Don't forget the baby. Then the 5 of us." Marina grinned. "We didn't mention Igor." Again, who hasn't understood? Natasha is my child. I still haven't told you I'm having twins. Marina did indeed return to her native place, not grief-stricken and broken, as many expected, but with proudly long shoulders. Her belly had already rounded, but her figure did not look out of shape. On the contrary, Marina had become something soft and feminine. Not a trace of her former head was left. However, this did not affect her character. It was only when Natasha let her guard down and exclaimed as he might, "How did Felix have the conscience to do this to you?" How did Marina respond? He was a jerk, and that was the end of the conversation. She had some savings, so Marina rented a small apartment not far from her friend. "We'll live together," she winked at Natasha. "You and me, and Evdokia Pavlovna. How, by the way, your mother-in-law is not very worried about your move." At first I thought she would go crazy. Natasha confessed. "You know how Evdokia Pavlovna was crying and shouting when Igor was packing. But she got over it, didn't seem to matter. Only now she looks at me even angrier than before and almost does not talk. So this is what you wanted, right? Isn't it?" Marina winked. "Yes," Natasha sighed. "But still, I hope that I would have a friendly family and that my future children would have grandparents. And here's the thing. My relatives died a long time ago. And with Evdokia Pavlovna, I was afraid to leave my child. She looks like a witch from a fairy tale. I'm telling you for sure. I believe that," Marina nodded. "I remember what she was like at your wedding. But don't worry. So, maybe when she sees the little one, she'll come around and recognize you as her favorite daughter-in-law. As you know, all sorts of miracles happen in life, you know." Natasha shrugged her shoulders. "That Evdokia Pavlovna. And that girl did not believe too much. And you're not that yet. Not pregnant." Marina looked expressively at her belly. Natasha shook her head no. "But I hope that Igor and I will have children. And for now the thought of having nephews is enough for me." You're going to let me name my children exactly that? You ask. Marina grinned. Of course, Alika. Another friend of Marina's youth also came to visit her, but by no means happy for her friend. Rather resembled crying. Nah. Why do you need all this trouble? She said with disapproval, shaking her head at the idea of raising a child by herself. That's suicide. And you can't raise 2 kids for the rest of your life. And your personal life would be over. What kind of man would want another man's kids? And what do I need these men? Waved his hand Marina. I've already seen enough of them. Until the end of life is enough. I begin to move to conscious motherhood. You just did not grow up in an orphanage. So you do not understand that abandoning a child is a sin. And it's wrong to have an abortion too. I can't do that to my own children. Just like my mother did to me. Traded me in for suitors and was like that. My children will grow up differently. Happily. However, she wouldn't budge and kept looking at her friend the way she looks at people who have decided to bury themselves alive. It got to the point where Marina shuddered when she saw that name on her phone screen. The nerd muttered to her, pondering whether or not to answer the call. She herself does not live and does not let others. Olga's personal life was not going too well indeed. She married early, but quickly divorced her husband. And she never found a new one. The girl was constantly calculating, but no amount of planning or calculation helped her to achieve happiness. A seemingly normal man turned out to be a fraud and led Julka around by the finger, and many did not pay attention to her at all. Maybe she was just jealous of you. Reluctantly, Natasha suggested, even though it did not work out with Felix, but you were happy with him. Have children, and Olga has no one. Jealous? Marina agreed. I'll tell you a secret. Valka always licked the guys who chased me at the technical school. I realized it with age. I used to be stupid when I was young. Anyway, the life of my friends went on. Natasha and her husband took a small one-room apartment on a mortgage, but it was their own. The girl graduated from the institute and got a job in a library. Things were gradually getting better for Marina too. She gave birth to twins, Alina and Pavlik, named the children after her grandparents. She also found a bad job at a remote location. This money was enough to rent an apartment and provide the children with everything they needed. Many friends and acquaintances helped her with some things. They gave her old things, advised doctors, and gave her discount cards from various stores. Marina's life gradually went back to normal. Only Alika rushed around like an untethered. All could not choose which groom better, an elderly but wealthy department head at the plant where she worked or a young, handsome locksmith. It seemed to be her destiny to look for a groom all her life. It went on like this until the very day Natasha was about to celebrate her 30th birthday. Her phone was ringing off the hook. Everyone was vigorously congratulating the girl, and only one call was not joyful. An unfamiliar, gruff voice asked if she knew Marina Vyazemsky. Surely you do. Without waiting for an answer, the voice continued. You are her sister, aren't you? At least, that's what it says on the phone. Come as soon as possible to the hospital. Marina was in an accident. Natasha was completely taken aback by this news and understood nothing. And after a couple of minutes, she got a call from Alice. Natasha, come quickly. Sobbing came out the girl. I can't do it alone. I have absolutely no idea what to do. Where are you? Natasha shouted. Where is Marina? What's going on there? We're at Central City Hospital. Had an accident with a long voice, said Valka. We were on our way to your banquet and had an accident. I'm all right. Just a couple of scratches. And Marina, well, come here. You will find out for yourself. Natasha dropped the call and looked at her husband. With what? I did not understand, Igor. He too looked stunned by this news. Marina was so often and a guest in their home that the man thought of her as a relative. No wonder the tragedy shocked him. Go to the restaurant and tell the guests that the party is canceled, or let them celebrate my birthday without me. I don't know what's best. The room is already booked and the food is ordered anyway. In general, Do as you know. And you helplessly? Igor asked. Natasha looked at her husband as if he said something stupid. And I'm going to Marina. What do you want me to do? Natasha called a cab and walked impatiently in front of the driveway. The car was running late. Then they stood for half an hour in a traffic jam, unthinkable for their small town. The whole world seemed to be conspiring against Natasha and was putting sticks in her wheels. But at last, she did make it to the hospital porch and rushed inside. Only her friend was sitting on one of the benches in the foyer, flipping through a magazine. At first, the picture seemed blasphemous to Natasha, but then she noticed that Olga's face was crying, and she forgave her everything. Where is Marina? Natasha asked, running closer. What is wrong with her? Marinka is in intensive care right now, said Olga, putting aside the magazine. She has a craniocerebral injury, a rupture of something. And well, it's a real horror. I didn't even remember the whole thing. I felt sick just looking at her. Do you have any idea how much blood there was? It's so scary, Natasha asked in a faltering voice. That's not a word, Olga said, and added that an elderly nurse whispered to me that I should pray. Maybe he will help. The girl pointed significantly upward. Natasha looked up as well. Somewhere up there, behind the not fresh, long-ticketed ceiling, there was the intensive care ward. Marina was being tortured there. What did the doctor say? Helpless. Natasha asked. Maybe you need money, or something else. I'll get everything. He didn't say anything. She shook her head. He didn't have time to talk, but he looked so frightened that, even I was afraid, though I haven't been afraid of men for a long time. Desperate, Natasha sank down on the bench next to her friend. Alka curiously looked at her from head to toe. That's a beautiful dress. Where did you get it? Did you rush here straight from the restaurant? Natasha looked at her friend in surprise. She did not immediately understand what she was talking about. What dress? Ah, this girl absent-mindedly ran her hand over the fabric. No, I came from home, Lord Balka. What does it matter? The shoes, the dresses. You'd better explain what happened. We were on our way to see you, Olga started to tell me. In my car, first we stopped at a store. Marinka wanted to buy you a survival kit. She knows that you are fond of it in your spare time. But let's not talk about those little things. Natasha interrupted her. Tell me about the accident. I don't know where it came from. Admittedly, friend, this Jeep I was watching closely on the road entered the intersection, and then it twisted our car. The impact landed on Marina's side, so nothing happened to me. And she just flailed her arms helplessly. Natasha grabbed her head with her hands and prayed, just as that unknown nurse had told her to, talking to the tracing paper. No miracle happened. The doctors could not save Marina. An hour and a half after the operation began, she died. Natasha could not get over this thought for a long time. Only yesterday her friend called her and laughed into the phone, telling her a funny story. And now she was gone. It just didn't make sense. Why is life so unfair? Natasha turned off her phone. She didn't want to see or hear anyone she knew. What could they say to her? Silly phrases like hang in there, hang in there. Life went on. Natasha knew that none of this was true. Life did not go on, at least for Marina herself, and Natasha's days were stained with darkness. Meaningless consolations could not fix anything. It was better not to hear them. Marina's funeral was over. The wake was a thing of the past. Natasha begged her boss for a leave of absence and lay at home, staring at the ceiling. Igor, when he had a day off, flustered around his wife. Are you sure that taking time off from work was a good idea? Wondering if he could go back to the library. Do you think I'm lazy too? Asked Natasha. How was your mother? What's that got to do with it? Irritatedly shrieked Igor. I just can't watch. How are you withering here in four walls? Marinka not come back. So why should I lose you too? It won't do any good for you, Lesha. Mark my words, I'll be back at work soon, reassured him Natasha, continuing to study the yellow stain on the ceiling. Don't worry. One day, a beautiful woman in a short, uniggy skirt stopped by, smelling of perfume. "Knock, knock," she said, walking into the room. "You're still lying down." "I am," Natasha confirmed. "What do you want?" "I brought you the present I bought you from Mariinka. I found it on the back seat. I'm sorry I'm late. I wasn't up to it." Natasha was looking at the embroidery with the angels. Marina believed in omens and said that there were paintings that foreshadowed motherhood. Maybe this was one of them. It was not for nothing that Marina made any hints about it. "Isn't it beautiful?" Olga asked. It was Marina's choice. But she has taste. She had everything. Natasha said in a husky voice. "And you had nothing. That's why it killed her." The smile slid off her face, and she glared angrily at her friend. "What are you talking about? You're out of your mind with your mourning." "Exactly, with mine," yelled out Natasha. "You don't even care about Marina's death. You're showing off in that short skirt, and she's gone. She's gone, and never will be. And all because of you," crazy muttered Olga, retreating to the threshold. "Igor, calm down your wife. She's off the chain." The man looked from one to the other helplessly and did not know what to do. Women's scandals had always been beyond his comprehension. Fortunately, the doorbell rang, and he ran out. As he opened the door, Natasha slowly approached her friend. "Get out of here. And I don't want to see your spirit." "I don't want to see you," she said angrily. "You are a murderer. Are you crazy?" Valka said, coming out into the hallway. "You are crying, madhouse." At the door, she ran into Evdokia Pavlovna. Yes, she looked as disgruntled as ever. "What on earth is going on here?" she asked, shouting so that on the first floor it was heard in front of the neighbors. Not ashamed. Natasha looked at her for the first time in her life and felt no fear. Grief gave her strength, or maybe it was Marina's invisible ghost guarding her from the other side. The girl was no longer afraid of her mother-in-law. "No, Evdokia Pavlovna, I am not ashamed," she replied. "And you can go now to the old ladies on the bench and tell them tall tales about me. You do it all the time, don't you?" Evdokia Pavlovna looked at her and gave out in indignation, and Natasha was triumphant. For the first time in her life, the girl had managed to put her mother-in-law in her place, and now she felt an unprecedented pleasure from her stunned look. "Igor, did you hear that? And keep quiet," Evdokia Pavlovna asked angrily, turning back to her son. "Let her insult your mother so easily." "Mom, really?" mumbled Igor. "You'd better leave. You're kicking me out," the woman asked incredulously. "I'm not kicking you out. It's just that we're in a mess here as it is," mumbled Igor. "Natasha is depressed, and her friend died. Anyway, you understand." "No, I don't," Evdokia Pavlovna said in an icy tone. "You allow yourself to insult your mother. Are you the boy I brought up? Father should have seen it. Just think." Continuing to grumble, she left the apartment, and Yulka slammed the door loudly and also went out into the entranceway. Igor stroked Natasha's head with a sad smile. "My quiet girl exploded. I didn't think I'd see that. No one understands what happened." Sobbing, "Natasha is not your mother, not just for them. Marina meant nothing. Was a casual acquaintance was and did not become. And for me, Marina is my sister. Can you imagine what it's like to lose your soulmate?" She suddenly pulled away from her husband, looking into the void, as if she remembered something terrible. Igor was frightened. "What is wrong with you? You do not feel well. What did you call me before?" whispered Natasha, "My girl." "I think so, yes," with bewilderment said Igor. "And what is Elyanka?" I had completely forgotten about Marina's children. I lie here, feeling sorry for myself, and now they are an unknown where. Natasha rushed into the hallway and began to shiver. Igor was dazed. He watched her. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To my small country," Natasha muttered, "to the orphanage. I hope there are people I know there." It will be much easier that way. Natasha walked through the gates of the orphanage with some trepidation. She never thought she would return to these places, and she didn't miss the walls of the orphanage at all. Still, at the sight of an old apple tree growing in the yard, Natasha felt a kind of nostalgia. Here she and Marina competed with a box of twigs, but in these bushes it was shrinking. They were hiding in each other's chattering secrets. Natasha was not at all surprised yet from behind the trees. Light Lenka and the girl with the smashed knees. I wonder if Marina's ghost missed those distant times, or preferred to go to a land more distant and beautiful. Forgetting all earthly attachments to Natasha's relief, the principal at the orphanage remained the same, only even more fulfilled, and painted her head black. The girl tried to ward off the thought that she looked like a well-fed crow and said politely, "Hello, Tasia Mikhailovna. Tell me, please, did Alyona and Pavel Vyazemsky come to you?" The principal looked at her over her spectacles. "Are you a relative of theirs?" Natasha shook her head. "No, I mean, almost related. I knew their mother, Marina Vyazemsky, very well. We were friends." "And so?" dryly asked the principal. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. Natasha well remembered such days in the past when the director of the orphanage was in a bad mood. She would pick on the children for little things and punish them for any little thing from her room. It was better not to show her face. "I would like to see them with despair," Natasha pronounced. "Don't you remember me? I was brought up in that children's home too. Lots of people were brought up here." The principal answered. "I can't count them all," Natasha Sazonova reminded her. "I also won a reading contest. They wrote about our children's home in the newspaper, and there was a picture of us posing against Pushkin's portrait. Do you remember?" Tasia Mikhailovna thought about it. "I think so, yes." "Did you read the poem Give Jim on happiness, Ella?" "It seems to me, yes," hastily replied Natasha. "Though the poem was quite different. And you gave me the book. I still keep it in memory of the orphanage. And of you, too, of course." Such a monstrous lie the girl never uttered. But what would you do for your children? She only hoped that the principal would not demand her book back. Finding an identical copy would be problematic. Tasia Mikhailovna melted. She came out from behind the desk and hugged the girl. "But how not to remember," she said. "There weren't many talents like that in our children's home. So why did you come? Did you miss the orphanage? Wanted to see what it's like here now?" "And that, of course," also cautiously agreed Natasha. "But it's Marina's children I'm most interested in. I am their godmother and almost a relative. Marina and I have been friends for more than 20 years. Children, children." Tasia Mikhailovna sighed. "Alyona and Pavel, that's right. They turned out not to be as good as you. They cry all day long. No psychologist helps. I think maybe they should go to the hospital." "We don't need to go to any hospital, please," Natasha said, frightened. "It is better to give them to me." Tasia Mikhailovna looked at her carefully and shrugged vaguely. "Let's see." She made a phone call and asked to bring the children. Natasha sat there like she was on pins and needles. As soon as the door fell off, she immediately rushed to the door and almost strangled Lenka and Pavlik in her arms. "My darlings," mumbled the girl in between kisses. "How have you been here without me?" The boy did not immediately recognize her and struck up a roar. Alyona, on the contrary, instantly recognized her, but also cried. Aunt Natasha, sobbing, took her aunt and then uttered a phrase that made the girl's heart freeze. "When is mother coming? Why has she been gone so long?" Natasha looked at the principal. She threw up her hands. They had been told. But Natasha knew from experience that no words can convince you of what has happened if you don't want to believe it. She herself still hadn't gotten used to the idea that Marina was no longer on Earth. "Everything will be all right," she said evasively. "Everything will be all right. Tell me in the meantime, how are you here? What are you doing?" "Nothing," gloomily answered Pavlik. "Everyone here is nasty," added Alyonka. Natasha gave the principal an apologetic smile and said, "Well, they can't all be." Nasty can be, stubbornly said Alyonka, and added, we want to go home to Mom. Aunt Netisha, will you take us from here to Mama? I can't take you. She's gone far away and won't be back yet, Netisha muttered. But seeing that the children were about to cry again quickly, she added, I can take you to my home. You want to live with me and uncles. And the children looked at each other with grief, and Pavlik nodded bravely. We want you to be good, Netisha. You don't feed us a swagger. Natasha remembered the disgusting porridge she hated as a child. Yeah, she certainly didn't feed her nephews those. When the children came to visit her, she treated them to homemade pies and candy. It was unlikely she would feed them like that all the time if she adopted them. But revealing her cards early in the presence of the principal was not worth scaring off her nephews by talking about the benefits of soups and cutlets. I can collect them, the girl asked hopefully, glancing at Tasia Mikhailovna. She frowned and shook her head. First, you have to go through the whole adoption process. You and your spouse, you are married. Hopefully, Natasha nodded and timidly asked, can it be quicker? I've heard that it can take months to get all the necessary certificates and checks. Just for your sake, the principal sighed. I will try to speed up the process as much as I can. As you know, I've made all the necessary connections over the years I've worked here. You'll have the children in the very near future, won't you? I promise. Natasha returned home, radiant with joy. Igor hadn't seen his wife so lively in a long time. Since that tragic anniversary, we'll be able to pick them up. Natasha Valeria laughed with her husband. Alyona and Pavlik will be our children. You see, Igor shook his head. This news was too unexpected and did not fit well in his head. Here, the girl laid out in front of him some papers. This is a list of certificates and documents, which must be provided. He would also have to see a psychiatrist and a narcologist. God, Igor, I hope you didn't indulge in anything illegal in your youth. Look, don't tell that to the doctor. Will the kids move here? Igor asked. His wife looked at him surprised. Yes. Where else would they go? But how do we all fit in here? In a faint voice, asked the man. Do you remember when we bought this apartment? We were still arguing about how the three of us would live here when the baby was born. And here we have two at once. Natasha shrugged. Probably not very comfortable, she admitted. Well, what do you suggest? Leave Marina's children in an orphanage and pretend they never existed in the world. No. Why not? Muttered Igor. We can visit them on weekends and bring them presents. Natasha looked at him carefully and said, I hope you're kidding now. Of course, dear, of course. Nervously grinned Igor. I just thought that in such a small apartment children just will not be given. They will, Natasha said firmly. Tasia Mikhailovna promised to take care of it. And she was right. 2 months later, the children were at their home. The apartment immediately began a merry bustle. Alyona and Pavlik ran from corner to corner and looked at every object. Of course, they had been here before, but only as guests now. The children looked at everything in a hostile manner. They were going to live here. Aunt Netisha, where will I sleep? The boy asked. Dibs on the window, cried out Alyonka. No, I'll lie down by the window. I objected, Pavlik. You'll still be afraid. Gray Wolf will come to you. Got it. Then I'll sleep with Uncle Natasha. Alyona easily agreed. Natasha, may I? The girl looked at Igor and shrugged. I guess you can, but only at first, until you get used to this house. Okay, Alyona, you're a big girl and adults sleep on their own beds. I see. Alyona nodded. And where is Uncle Igor's bed? Probably from this day on the floor, the man muttered. The three of us can hardly fit on one bed. Natasha vainly reassured herself that over time their lives would settle down and go back to normal. Things were not getting any easier. A few days planned turned into a week into a month. Alyona was so used to sleeping with her that it was impossible to move her to the children's bed. Alone, the girl began to have nightmares. She would soon nod off and wake up. Igor slept in the kitchen. He brought an air mattress from the store and slept on it until it burst. Then the man started laying a plate on the floor and slept that way, dressed in a winter down jacket for warmth. "I feel like a partisan in the forests of Belarus," he muttered. "Now I understand what my great-grandfather felt." "Your great-grandfather probably had it worse," Natasha tried to joke, even though she knew how pathetic it sounded. "Who knows where I'll end up?" Igor asked in a deep voice. Gradually, their jokes dried up. The couple practically stopped talking. Igor walked crouched and tired, and Natasha was very worried, bearing in mind the dangerous work of her husband. There was no place in the kindergarten, and she was forced to leave the library to look after them. Costs became more and income less. Natasha could almost physically feel the tension between her and Igor. "Scattered toys again in the kitchen," grumbled the man returning from work. "Alenka, but can't you put your predators somewhere else? Give me some peace, at least in my room." "And since when did the kitchen become your room?" Natasha wondered. "Since when they evicted me from all the other places," answered Igor. Alyona gathered up the stuffed tigers and lions for a long time and took them to the room. Natasha looked at her husband confused. "You could communicate with the child more politely," she said. "You can't do that." "Well, sorry," mumbled Igor. "We had 2 fires and 1 false alarm today. And before that, I was up half the night," spoken from side to side. After that, it's kind of hard to choose words. Don't you think? Soon everything will be fine. I muttered to the girl, though I was not sure of my own words. I wonder how, Igor sneered. The time was not right. But from the experience of the past few days, Natasha knew that her husband's mood would not improve in an hour or two. So she dared to ask Igor, "You won't have some money?" "A little. How much is that?" "Dry?" asked her husband. "At least a couple of thousand," said the girl. Alenka's pants and blouses were both worn out and too small. Alicia, my friend from the library, gave me some things left over from her daughter. But everything there is great. We'd at least have to make it 6 months without losing our legs in the process, Igor added profoundly. I haven't had any savings for a long time. Honey, you asked me that a week ago. From this, Natasha's news snickered. Sorry, I just thought I had a printing press, Igor concluded. Or what? Am I taking money out of thin air? Unfortunately, there's none of that. Natasha will have to make it on her own. And even though her husband sounded the same tone as usual, Natasha felt a chill in his voice. Something had gone wrong in their relationship, and how to fix it, she hadn't known since the children had moved in. Evdokia Pavlovna almost stopped coming to visit her son. Igor put it down to his mother's failing health, but Natasha realized that it was about something else. And if the opinion of her mother-in-law about Pavlik and not too worried her, the thought of how Evdokia Pavlovna has not pulled her son to his side made her worried. One day, returning from a walk, Natasha heard a familiar voice in the apartment. The girl did not understand everything her mother-in-law was saying. All she understood was that her mother-in-law would rip you off. Go wash your hands and go to your room, she said, Natasha to the children. We'll be eating dinner soon. And she herself went into the kitchen, taking away from the conversation she was about to have. Good afternoon, Evdokia Pavlovna. She greeted her mother-in-law. He is not so kind, mumbled the woman, turning around at her voice. Igor looked a little embarrassed. He did not seem to be expecting his wife. Natasha realized that her main adversary, as always in this dispute, would be Evdokia Pavlovna. Are you dissatisfied again? Natasha asked, leaning against the sex. And what is there to be dissatisfied about? Inquired her mother-in-law. You do not work. You sit on my son's neck. You bring some fodder to raise them. You don't know who their parents are or what their genes are. They'll grow up to chase Igor out of the apartment as a thank you for his happy childhood. Don't talk nonsense, outraged Natasha. No one's chasing, and don't you dare insult our children. We don't know who is better than you or them. Ours, Evdokia Pavlovna repeated, with a meaningful glance at her son. "Did you hear that, Igor?" He still did not look at his wife and mother. Sat with his head down, like our schoolboy. "You go, mother," he muttered. "Natasha and I will talk to him ourselves." "Yes, you will. Evdokia Pavlovna is so soft. He grew up like his father." "Mama, please go," Igor repeated with pressure. Mother-in-law once again kicked out and left the kitchen. After a few seconds, the door in the hallway slammed. "Mother and Aunt Eudosia." "And already gone," shouted Alyonka from the room. "She will not have dinner with us. She won't," Natasha answered, keeping her gaze fixed on her husband. "She doesn't like buckwheat porridge." She closed the door to the kitchen and inquired about the fodder. "So my mother didn't put it right," mumbled Igor. "Yes, so the general meaning was correct. Only the word is something different," Natasha asked. "Darling, let's talk about it another time," Igor asked. "I have to get up early tomorrow, and that's why you were going to bed at 18 o'clock, said Natasha, looking at the clock. "Tell me honestly, would you also like Pavlik and Alyonk not to be here? For them to disappear and never show up in your life again?" The man repeated honestly. "I'm just tired. Our apartment has become not even a kindergarten, but a kind of train station. The constant noise underfoot, something lying around. Impossible to walk, nowhere to lie down." "And what do you suggest?" Natasha interrupted him. "Admit that we're not ready to be parents." "A little," said Igor. "We have the wrong conditions. Look for yourself. Can this apartment fit 2 kids? I think we should return the babies to the orphanage. And a little later, when we get back on our feet, we can take them back." "A little later. When is that?" Natasha asked. "In 10 years or 20. Or maybe when Alyona and Pavlik have kids of their own, which I'll ask for a weekend to figure out." Igor was silent. Natasha looked at his face, so familiar, and for the first time in her life she felt disgust. "Okay," she said in a detached tone. "Let's discuss it all." Then her husband nodded in relief. "Yes, I don't think we need to spoil each other's moods at night. As they say, we'll sleep better in the morning. Let's spend this evening in silence." Igor went to bed very early, almost as soon as the whole family had eaten dinner. Natasha closed the door to the kitchen, sank down on the bed, and watched the children play. Her thoughts were far away. The children could not be returned to the orphanage. It would be a betrayal to them and Marina. Yes, Natasha wouldn't dare do it herself. She was too attached. Knees and Pavlik's soul. But was there such a place where they could all go, where children would be loved the way Natasha herself had been loved by her grandmother as a child? The answer came with itself. The girl was surprised that she had not thought of it before. The village. Outside the city, the house where her grandmother had once lived remained. It wasn't much of a mansion, and its condition probably left a lot to be desired. The last time Natasha had been there a couple of years ago, she had thought the house was a bit shabby. Still, it was a haven. If her grandmother could manage the house and the vegetable garden on her own, could her granddaughter not? The time on the clock was approaching 9. Natasha sighed and began to put the children to bed. "Aunt Natasha, let's play some more," Alina asked. "It's still too early." "No, now we go to bed." Softly, but in an uncompromising tone, answered the girl. "Because tomorrow will be a day full of adventures. How would you like to go on a journey?" Hearing the word, the children immediately brightened up. "To travel to Africa with hope?" asked Alyona. "We will see real tigers and lions." "Africa is far away. We won't make it back in time for lunch." Pavlik, a realist, shooed her away. "To the park is probably better," Natasha said to the village. "I don't know if there are tigers in those places, but I certainly promise cows and sheep, and also pigs and rabbits and chickens. Well, get to bed so you can get up early tomorrow and get everything done." The children raced to brush their teeth. Alyonka, as usual, lay down on the big bed, and when they turned off the light, she asked in a whisper Aunt Natasha, "Why are you crying? Did you want to go to Africa instead of the country?" "I'm not crying," answered Natasha, looking at her head. "I have a little cold. That's all. Let's go to bed. Otherwise, we'll have a padlock. I'm not sleeping." The boy from his bed responded, "I'm thinking, how much stuff should we take with us? Carrots for the rabbits, cabbage for the goats, also my truck and Alenka's for the tigers. The main thing is not to forget." Natasha listened to his wise reasoning and smiled. Yes, parting with Igor painful, but with these two little angels she will be able to survive anything. The girl once again praised herself for making the right choice, closed her eyes, and fell asleep. Igor the next morning rose earlier than usual and moved unusually quietly, with all his might, trying not to wake anyone. Natasha, of course, heard him tiptoeing from the kitchen to the bathroom, calling his name in the hallway, but diligently pretended to be asleep. If her husband didn't want to communicate, neither did she. When the front door closed behind Igor, Natasha mentally said goodbye to him and got up from the bed. "Guys, get up," she called out to the children. "We have a very important day ahead of us. Have you remembered?" In a jiffy, the children woke up and jumped out of bed. Natasha went to the closet and began to gather clothes. And Pavlik and Alyanka rushed to the toys. In the apartment there was a commotion unprecedented for such an early hour. "My darlings, we can't all fit in here," said Natasha. Upset, she looked at the suitcases. There were only 2 of them, but a lot of things. "We won't take the tigers," Alyanka asked with horror, and the truck echoed her Pavlik. Natasha looked at the children's distraught faces and sighed. "Let's try to think of something." In the end, at home remained winter boots, girls, and her down jacket, and the entire film zoo fit in the suitcase. Natasha decided that either everything would work out before winter, or she would come back here and get the rest of the clothes. Or, as Igor put it, she would get money out of thin air and buy new clothes. Natasha was in a hurry, putting everything she could into the suitcase. Deep in her heart, she feared that Igor would return home for something. This was the first time in her memory that he had ever taken off from work. But who knows how things could turn out? Natasha had no idea what she would say to her husband if he caught her with the suitcases in her hands. She did not want to face Igor. It was easier to leave the letter. After taking a moment, Natasha sat down at the table and picked up a piece of paper. The idea of a farewell note also proved difficult because the words did not go to her head. In the end, her message came out confused with a lot of crossing out and blurred from tears in the ink. Leaving for the country, Natasha wrote, "We won't bother you anymore. Be happy. You'll have plenty of room here alone." Natasha left the letter on the table. She went out into the hallway and took a shred. "It's time to go," she shouted to the children. "The animals are already waiting for us to go to the village. By cab was expensive, but Natasha decided to overpay, so as not to suffer in the train with 2 suitcases and children. All the way, Pavlik turned his head, and on seeing any little cute house, he asked it here. "Natasha, we're here already." "Not yet." With a smile, she answered, "We have to go a little further." In the back of her mind, Natasha was afraid that the children would be disappointed to see the hut they were going to. But that didn't happen. Those were too young. And in childhood, any house seems like a palace. "Wow," Alina exhaled when, out of the car, "It's beautiful. It looks like Grandma Yaga's house." Pavlik appreciated it. Natasha thought that from the boy's mouth was the best compliment she could hear. Her grandmother's house truly looked like a witch's wooden dwelling, a bit lopsided and overgrown with wild grapes. I guess if Natasha had come to these places as a child, she would have been thrilled too. Although why, Natasha probably remembered that in her 8 years she adored the countryside. Even now she experienced a strange, pinching feeling, as if she had returned to her homeland. The children immediately rushed to examine the yard. Their voices sounded here and there. They did not miss a corner of the garden. The old dog booth, the overgrown gazebo that had long been abandoned by its owner, the ancient barn, Everything made the little one so happy, as if the children had entered a magical land. No different. Then it was the turn of the house. "Dibs on sleeping at the window," shouted Alyonka, barely escaped inside. Just like a few weeks earlier in the apartment Pavlik wanted to object, but Natasha laughingly beat him to it. "There is enough room for everyone, if you want. There's a window for everyone." And indeed, there was space for everyone. After the small apartment, there was room for Alina's zoo, and Pavlik's cars, and Natasha's original closet. Until late at night she scrubbed, and Dracula every surface in the house. Then she fell asleep. Barely had her head touched the pillow. The girl was awakened by the phone ringing. Igor returned from his shift and found her letter. Natasha had moved to the village 24 hours ago, but it seemed to her that a week had passed. "Where have you disappeared to?" shouted the man instead of greeting. "Natasha, where are the children? You must have read my letter by now, so you know everything. Why ask unnecessary questions? We're in the country, and since when are you interested in children?" "I am their foster father," Igor answered fiercely. Yes, Natasha was surprised. "It hasn't been noticeable lately. It seemed more like we were in your way." Her husband was silent for a while, and then said tiredly, "Go back home. What kind of nonsense are you up to?" "No nonsense," Natasha replied. "I saw that our presence tormented you, that we interfered. You are free now. No one will interfere with your rest, and the bed is all yours." "I'm sorry, Igor, but I really think it's better for both of us." Without waiting for her husband's new objections, she dropped the call and sighed the hardest part was over. So why did Natasha feel even worse than before? The next few days were like one another. Natasha got up very early for fresh air. It seemed easier than in the city. She cooked the children breakfast and went to work in the vegetable garden. June was in full swing, but she still had time to plant something, such as carrots and beets, some of the greens the kids were playing around with. She was under her care. Natasha made friends with Tamara Alexandrovna, an elderly, lonely neighbor. She helped her as much as she could to look after the children. If Natasha needed to go somewhere else, she gave helpful advice. "We have a kindergarten here," she told Natasha. "Can you place the children there? I think that won't be a problem. They'll have more fun together with the other kids." "It would be good," Natasha sighed. "But for now, I can look after them myself. There is no work. When I find something appropriate, if I do." She corrected herself mentally, but tried not to think about it. For now, Natasha did not have much money. And some jewelry, rare gifts from Igor, which could be sold. She was afraid to even imagine what would happen when all the savings ran out. There was a river not far from the village, and in good weather the locals often went to the beach. Natasha also took her children there. She loved to watch how excitedly the little ones splashed in the shallow water, listening to their happy cries, building sand castles with the children. I wanted to believe that at such moments Marina watches them from heaven and rejoices together with the kids. However, in spite of all the pleasures, these walks had their difficulties. It was difficult to keep track of two children. In addition, the locals turned out to be too friendly and vying to get to know Natasha. "How cute are your children?" Antonina shook her head, a middle-aged woman who came to the beach on weekends to bathe in the sun. "And they look a lot like you. Especially the daughter is a copy of her mother." "Yes," replied Natasha with a smile. "Thank you." She kept her eyes fixed on Alyonka splashing knee-deep in water. It was impossible to drown in the shallow water. But Natasha watched her all the same, and she was expecting all sorts of trouble. Pavlik, meanwhile, was chasing butterflies through the grass. "Don't run far," Natasha shouted at him. "All right," he responded. Alyonka fell into the water and burst into tears. "The frog ran away from me." Natasha rushed to the girl and began to calm her down. "And why are you crying?" Deeper. The little frog swam home to his mother. "It's time for his lunch. Then he'll come back and play with you again. You'll see." "Really?" hopefully asked Alyonka. But of course it's true. We go home from the beach, but then come back again. Isn't it true? Natash's words were interrupted by a loud splash and someone's cry of a child drowning. Natasha grabbed Lenka in her arms as if she thought it was her daughter and looked where people were pointing. Pavlik was caught up in the story after all, taking advantage of the fact that Natasha was busy with his little sister. The boy went to the precipice, where he was strictly forbidden to go, and he fell into the water. Natasha was horrified. She had to run and save Pavlik, but she could not leave the girl alone. She was afraid something would happen to her too. The thought of leaving Lenka for Antonina or someone else did not occur to her at all. Fortunately, help came when she couldn't expect it. Some man was resting on the beach, threw himself into the water, and swam to Pavlik. People kept shouting, and Natasha watched with bated breath as the stranger grabbed the boy and dragged him to the shore. Natasha grabbed Lenka in her arms and rushed toward them. But everything was calmed down by Pavlik's man. "You're a big boy now, a hero. Why are you crying?" "I don't know why you are crying," but the boy was not impressed. Natasha lowered Lenka to the ground, took Pavlik from his arms. She held him close to her. "Thank you," she whispered to the man, and she herself leaned over the boy and began to cover his face with kisses. "Calm down. Don't be silly. You don't have to cry. You don't have to cry. It is all in the past. I am here now. Everything will be all right." "I want my mother," Pavlik exclaimed. Again the same words that made Natasha's heart go in her heels. But when would they get used to Marina's absence? Her heart told her that such a time would never come. She herself had never come to terms with the death of her parents. Natasha looked at the stranger with confusion. He shrugged his shoulders. "Don't worry. The boy will calm down soon enough. The main thing is that he's all right. And which of us has the nerves and not in place? It's time." "You're probably right," Natasha grinned. "Still, how nice that you were there." I was at a loss. She only now recognized the man. He often came to the beach. At the same time, he took out his paints and his easel and painted the river. Natasha liked to sneak a peek at him. She could not paint herself, but other people's talents delighted her. Antonina noticed the girl's attention and managed to gossip that he was a visiting artist who rented a house in the village for the summer. Art freaks are like that. The woman shrugged her shoulders. "He'll draw those reeds and go away. Mark my words. And then our villages will be admired somewhere in Amsterdam." "How could you tell?" The man looked about 40 years old. He was blonde, simple-minded, not a celebrity at all. More like an amateur, one of those who sell pictures in the underpass. Now the stranger's appearance had become even more unsightly, with water dripping down his shorts in rivulets. His hair was wet and dripping from his head. "And it's all Natasha's fault for failing as a chicken on the grid. Do you need a girl? Why don't you come with us? We were on our way home anyway. And after what happened, I'm not in the mood to stay here any longer. I'll make you some tea. Or maybe you need more work on your painting." "But the painting won't get away from me," the man smiled. "And neither is the river. So thank you for the invitation. I accept." While the stranger was gathering painting supplies, Natasha rolled the plates and buried Pavlik in towels. Accompanied by encouraging cries of pain, they went home, just like a real family. Suddenly thought the girl, mother, father, and children. If only it had been Igor in that man's place. By the time Pavlik returned home, he had recovered somewhat and struck up a conversation with his savior. "If I could swim, I would never drown," he said. "I will definitely learn tomorrow." "No, Pavlik, not so soon," Natasha said hurriedly. "First, I'll find you a good teacher. For you with the tape corrected. It will make me feel better myself if you learn to swim. Consider that you have already found it," the man said. "Alexei Vitalievich, you can just call me Alex." He winked at the children. "Happy to teach you and throw the roof. Is it for nothing? I came here." You surprised Natasha. "Will you teach the children?" "Of course I will. And why not?" The painter shrugged his shoulders. My father taught me to swim too, though he had no pedagogical education. Believe me, the diploma in this business is not the most important thing. Yes, that's not what I meant, she muttered. It's embarrassing to ask you for such a favor. You've already helped us today, and you think I'm lazy. Alex winked at her. That it's very difficult for me to save drowning people, and that's why I want to have fewer of them. The more people I teach swimming, the fewer I have to save. Makes sense. Well, it does, actually. The girl muttered and laughed. But you have a strange way about you. It's not like people. A man of art. The man threw up his hands. What else should I be? Pavlik confided in him, and immediately after returning home took Alexei to look at the toys. This truck is my favorite. My mother gave it to me. He told me. And this car has lost a wheel. It needs to be fixed, but I don't have a spare. An accident on the road. The boy laughed. Alex. He patted the boy on the shoulder. It's okay, we'll think of something. Natasha put the kettle on and fussed on the bed on the table. Alyonka stealthily approached and touched her arm. What is it, sweetheart? Asked the girl. A little bit, Natasha whispered the girl. There's Uncle Igor walking around, watching where he walks. Surprised, Natasha. What are you doing? Behind the fence, the girl looked out the window and saw a familiar silhouette. It was Igor. No doubt he was standing looking at her from the street, half hidden by the trees. Well, the hostess is about to have her tea. Fun, Alex asked, stepping into the kitchen. Paul and I are hungry. Yes, yes, Natasha said absent-mindedly now. She only turned away from the window for a few seconds to answer. And when she looked outside again, her husband was gone. Could it be that this vision was the same for her and Alina? It couldn't be. Most likely, Igor saw a strange man in the window and quietly left. Natasha wanted to cry. Only talking to loud-mouthed Alex distracted her from her heavy thoughts. At dinner, the man told her a little about himself. Actually, I live in the capital, he told her. I came here temporarily to take a break from the bustle of the city, to our village. Natasha was surprised. Why such a choice all of a sudden? There are 1,000 of them in the country. Once I had relatives living in these places, Alex explained. Now I was drawn here. The call of the blood, you could say. I never thought it would happen to me. My grandmother used to live in this house, Natasha said. As a child, I vacationed with her every summer. Maybe I even met you. The man shook his head. Unfortunately, that's out of the question. My relatives didn't communicate well with each other, so I didn't go here as a child. Natasha was able to ask the question she was interested in only at the end of the dinner, when she worked up the courage. Tell me, hesitantly, she said. Say. Alex interrupted her. Let's call each other you, otherwise you're canny. It's embarrassing. Okay. Natasha nodded obediently. Tell me, Alex, do you happen to know a sculptor named Felix? You probably all know each other in your company, don't you? The man shook his head. No, Natasha, I'm sorry, but Moscow is too big a village. It's impossible to know everyone there. And apparently, this Felix you're talking about is not a great talent, since his name isn't on everyone's radar. Pity, sighed the girl. She didn't know what kind of response she was expecting from Alex to tell her what a bastard this Felix was. Confirmation that the girl he'd left Marina for, with the kids, hadn't made her happy either. Alex left, and Natasha sat staring at her phone for a long time. There had been no calls from Igor for days. Now, he wouldn't call anymore. Sadly, she thought, she'll tell my mother and accuse me of all the mortal sins, make up new stories about me. As the days passed, the children's friendship with Alex grew stronger. He was teaching the children to swim, and soon Pavlik and Alina were happy to be there, where they were waist-deep in water splashing each other. The man often stopped by for dinner and even helped Natasha to mend the sagging fence. In return, the girl treated him to pies. Natasha felt purely friendly toward her new acquaintance and bitterly thought that one day it would all be over. Yes, Alex paints his picture and returns to Moscow. The outlines of the river on his canvas were becoming clearer. The landscape was nearing its completion. Home soon, Natasha asked one day, walking up to him on the beach and looking at the picture. The painting was beautiful. Do you want to send it to an exhibition now? Why? Alex was surprised. Well, the painting is almost finished. Summer will be over soon too. Softly said the girl. There's still a whole month of summer left. Alex said slowly. And about paintings, why not start a new one, for example? Natasha asked. Alex looked at her and snapped his fingers. Your portrait. What do I think you make? A really good model. Natasha did not like that word. It reminded her of Felix. Alex, on the other hand, took her grimace in his own way and laughed. I'm not asking you to undress, if that's what you imagine. It'll be a very ordinary portrait, like the girls of Turgenev. How do you like that idea? I guess I don't mind, Natasha smiled. Come to think of it, she was never particularly admired. Of course, Igor periodically said compliments, but did it reluctantly, even embarrassed. And the fact that someone wished to paint a portrait of her had certainly never happened. Posing on the beach was embarrassing for Natasha. So Alex came with Albert to her house, sat in their living room for an hour or two every day. I didn't think it would take this long, Natasha pronounced by the neck. Portraits at fairs are painted in half an hour. Alex seemed offended by her words. This isn't some fair pencil portrait that amateurs paint, he said. I graduated from the Academy of Arts, trained abroad, took dozens of lessons from the most renowned masters. Natasha was embarrassed by this list. So much effort and all for her stupid portrait. Yes, of course, she muttered. Sorry, nothing, softened, said Alex. You won't be disappointed in the result. You'll see. Your portrait will be admired in Moscow. It made you famous. Natasha thought that instead of fame, she could at least use a little money. But to ask Alex if she could get something for her portrait, the girl hesitated. One August day, an unexpected guest showed up at her doorstep, or rather, Alyonka the guest first noticed her through the window. Grandma has come, she announced. Who? Natasha was surprised. Alyonka, because of her small age, could call an elderly neighbor Tamara and Antonina from the beach, and even some 20-year-old student a grandmother. That her mysterious guests would turn out to be Evdokia Pavlovna. Natasha did not even think about it. Grandma repeated Alyonka and ran to her room to hide from her old memory. The children were afraid of Natasha and their mother-in-law like fire. Evdokia Pavlovna crossed the threshold of the house and stopped in indecision. Compared with the last time they had met, the woman had lost weight. Natasha was alarmed. Asked Evdokia Pavlovna, "Are you ill?" "I am sick all the time now," gloomily replied her mother-in-law. "My blood pressure is skyrocketing, you know." "Why?" Natasha asked. "Did something happen to you? Maybe some kind of trouble with Igor." Natasha remembered his work and went cold. He was such a risk-taker, always went into the thick of it. With Igor, thoughtfully repeated Evdokia Pavlovna. "Yes, well, with him exactly the trouble. He drinks, and all because of you for a month, probably. At work, Igor gave him leave. They keep him out of pity. But who knows how long it will last." Natasha kept silent. Evdokia Pavlovna continued. "Go back home. That's enough." But walked. Natasha almost choked with indignation. "What did you just say?" "Evdokia Pavlovna, I didn't mishear you." "You did. Do you think I'm walking around here?" My mother-in-law shrugged her shoulders dismissively. "I do not know what you do here." "Yes, only Igor said that the men come to you." "Oh, so men," Natasha repeated. "So I'll tell you something, Evdokia Pavlovna. If Igor wants me to come back, let him come and ask me himself. And in this case, as they say, goodbye." She turned away and started chopping carrots for the salad. All her rage went into those movements, although, in fact, she wanted to throw the carrot aside and burst into tears. "You never pitied my son with reproach," said Evdokia Pavlovna. "You never appreciated him." The woman left the house with dignity and disappeared behind the doors. There was the creaking of the garden gate, and everything fell silent. Natasha sank into a chair and cried like a child. The girl was bitter and hurt that everything had turned out this way. Alyonka quietly approached her and asked Aunt Natasha, "Did grandmother touch you?" "Yes, honey," the girl nodded. "She said that I was behaving badly." "It's not true." Alenka shook her head. "Are you the best?" At these words, Natasha cried even harder and hugged the girl. "Thank you, my darling. If you only knew how much I love you and Pavlik." Deep in her heart, Natasha expected Igor to come to his senses, to realize everything, to ask her forgiveness, and to say that he could not live without children. But time passed, and she had not heard from her husband. He even stopped calling her. "So she didn't need me that much." The girl thought sadly, well, so be it. Autumn was approaching and the rains were falling. One day, when Natasha had to go to Alex, it rained heavily. She wanted to call the man and cancel, but he did not pick up the phone. Natasha began to worry about taking the children out in the rain. She left them at her neighbor's and went on her way. The roads in the village are thoroughly unleashed, and Natasha barely made it to the right house. Several times, almost falling down on the way the door was unlocked. Thoroughly wiped her feet, she entered the house and called out to Alex. A man's voice could be heard from the kitchen side. It sounded like a painter talking on the phone. Not wanting to disturb him, Natasha went into the room and admired her portrait of the girl. She seemed to look prettier in the photo than she did in real life. Such a proud posture, a mysterious look. Who knew what it all cost her? After every hour Natasha sat here without moving. Having seen enough of the portrait, the girl began to wander aimlessly around the room. The furnishings here were left from the previous owners, as they call it, grannies. But Alex also had a hand in the interior. On the walls hung his pencil drawings, quick sketches from nature of what Natasha called fair. There were portraits of some of the locals, friendly caricatures. Natasha was also surprised to see portraits of Alan and Pavlik. When they had appeared here, it seemed to the girl that these drawings had not been there a couple of days before. Natasha came closer to look at them closely. The children in the portraits were as lifelike. Alyonka wrinkled his nose at the sun. Pavlik laughed his head off. Sweet, soulful drawings. Natasha noticed a signature in the corner of the portrait, and her heart dropped. She blinked, hoping it was a squiggle and would disappear. But no, everything remained as it was. Alex finished talking and stepped into the room. Natasha sent the portraits away and tried to calm down. She wasn't ready for a serious conversation yet. For a start, she needed to collect her thoughts at the sight of her guest, and the men smiled. "I hadn't noticed. Sorry about hanging out with a friend. Haven't heard from him in 100 years. Mumbled Natasha and added, "I called you. I thought something had happened." "Called?" Alex asked me again. Surprised, looking at his cell phone. It turned out to be muted. I forgot to change the settings. In the morning, the girl was silent, not knowing how to approach the topic of interest to her. The truth was so shocking that Natasha could not string two words together. The man looked around and asked if the children were with you. "Did you leave them at home?" "They are at the neighbors today. It is very bad weather to go for a walk. I decided that with Tamara Alexandrovna, they would be better off." "Reasonable, reasonable." Alex nodded, although the news seemed to upset him. "Still, it's a pity. It seems that I have to leave today. There's some business in Moscow. There's no telling when the next time I'll see you. You'll see us." "What for?" Natasha asked. "The portrait is almost finished." "A portrait is one thing," the man replied. "And me, well, I don't want to part with you." Natasha was silent. Alex suddenly had an idea and said, "What if you came with me?" "Where?" "To Moscow." She was surprised. "Why not do that?" Alex asked. "Tell you the truth, I have liked you for a long time. You could say that I fell in love with you at first sight, and your children are not an obstacle for me. I'd be happy to raise them with you. You say, Natasha honestly interrogated. Do you know how to talk like that? I mean, tell the truth. Don't you understand? The painter was surprised by her question. Why don't you admit that your real name is Felix? Are these children yours? Natasha asked. Why did you have to go around? Yes, about using someone else's name and deceiving me. I saw the signature on the pictures. There's no Alex there. That's bullshit. Why would you lie? I didn't lie. The man answered. My name really is Alexei. My passport name is Felix. It's just an alias. But why couldn't you say that you're the father of Alyanak and Pavlik? Natasha kept up. Although it's true, a father is just a name. Judge not, ye shall not be judged, Alex said with pathos. And who am I to judge? Natasha shrugged. You've already been judged, Marina. I left you with your mistresses, and rightly so. Neither she nor the children were no use to you. What has changed in a few years? Old age is coming. There won't be anyone to give you a glass of water. Alex's face has become blotchy and less handsome and benevolent than before. None of your business, he barked. I just want to raise my own kids. I get it. They're not yours, and never have been, Natasha replied. I am their mother now, and I will not give them up to anyone. I also need to know how you got my address and how you found us. He must have bribed someone to get the information. The painter was fanning himself with anger. Natasha backed away from him in fear. Whatever you think of, I'll get the children back. He shouted. Look at you. You don't have a job, and your husband is missing out on something. Who in their right mind would take your side? I'll file a court order, and they'll give the kids to me because I'm the real father. If you don't want to do it right, you'll do it wrong. Natasha ran from his house as fast as if the earth was burning under her feet. On the way back, she fell twice and towards the house. Tamara Mikhailovna came running all dirty. Children's cries could be heard from the windows. Natasha, after all she had been through, all sorts of horrors came to mind. She ran onto the porch and shouted, Children, are you all right? Natasha entered the house and almost fell over in amazement. Tamara Alexandrovna, the children and Igor were looking at her. For a moment, there was silence in the house. Then the man hesitantly said hello. I did not find you here and decided to ask around the neighbors. Mom, Uncle Igor arrived. Alenka announced. The events of the day, her quarrel with Alex, her meeting with her husband, and the fact that Alyanka called her mother for the first time came crashing down on Natasha, and she almost collapsed on the floor. Igor picked her up and alarmed her. Asked what happened. You don't feel well. Natasha, you're all dirty. She remembered that she had once met her husband in the same way, falling on the asphalt near the fire station, and burst into tears. Everything repeated itself. Igor came to her aid again. I'll put the tea on, Tamara Alexandrovna announced and slipped out of the room. It seemed she wanted to give the spouses an opportunity to be alone. How good of you to come, Natasha cried, tucking herself into her husband's shirt. If I had known that you would meet me like this, I would have come even earlier, joked Igor. Actually, I expected that you'll let me down the stairs after all I told you. I guess it would have been deserved. Evdokia Pavlovna came here, Natasha remembered. She said you were drinking. It's true. It was true, my husband nodded. It was hard for me without you and the children. But now I pull myself together. I swear, that rag you left is gone. I love you, Natasha whispered. How nice of you to come. The children also left the room, as if they felt that this conversation was not meant for their ears. Igor looked into Natasha's face and asked, so what happened? Felix has arrived, Natasha said. The father of Alyanka and Pavlik. She added, noticing Igor's uncomprehending look, has come to his senses and wants to take the children back. But I won't give them up for anything, nor will you. And we, corrected her husband. Now I will be there for you. I always promise. They sat up late into the night and talked and talked. The next day, Igor paid Alex a visit. It is unknown what they talked about, But the woeful artist no longer bothered Natasha. Eventually, Natasha forgot him like a bad dream. The whole family returned to the city. At first, Natasha was afraid to go there. She was afraid the story would start all over again. But Igor assured her, and now I realize that the brave are in the shack. Life has taught me. In addition, I have one more piece of news for you. Mom decided to give us her apartment. She said that 3 rooms are too much for her, and she will move into our 1-room apartment. Evdokia Pavlovna. Natasha was amazed. I don't believe it. People tend to change. Igor shrugged his shoulders, and I am the best proof of that. Gradually, their lives got better. Alyonka and Pavlik began to call their foster parents mom and dad, and soon there was a new addition to their family. Natasha had a daughter, little boy, and the house became crowded again, but it did not upset anyone. Natasha had a real family such as she had dreamed of long ago, watching other people's happiness from the windows of the orphanage.